Hello, Voidwalkers. Liz here. I'm very excited to share with you guys this new episode that Dave and I have going. It is about a game franchise that is very near and dear to my heart. But before we get going, I did want to cover a few topics or a few items, more accurately, with you all. First, there are a few corrections I do have to say. One, we are aware that Shinji Mikami, while he was director for The Evil Within the first game, he did step back from being director in the second game, but that did not mean he did not stay involved. He instead stayed on as one of the producers and supervisors. So I believe I was a little bit inaccurate in my statement about that, and you will hear that. So just know we are aware he actually was producer and supervisor on The Evil Within 2. Second of all, for those of you out there who catch it, and we do it the whole way through, yeah, her name is Myra, not Moira. Whoops. The names are only a few letters difference, and that was my bad of totally mixing up her name and calling her Myra. So we are aware her name is actually Myra. Bear with us as we say the wrong names for the entire episode. Uh, the other item I did want to cover is just to ask you all to be gracious with us. We do get into some heavier topics this episode, and one thing I do want to ask is it is very important to Dave and I that the conversations we have in this podcast are kept as organic as possible. We do very little. We basically do not script at all. We just do very bare bones outlines to keep ourselves on topic and make sure we don't miss points that we want to cover. But we otherwise want the conversations to evolve naturally. That being said, we try to be as nuanced as possible in our verbiage and in how we address certain topics, especially more specific ones. So I do just ask that you all please be gracious with us. I know we are going to get into the discussion of mental illness and neurodivergence in this episode. And as somebody who is very neurodivergent myself, I do ask that you all just bear with us as we may make some mistakes. We will do our best to correct those. And then if there is a better way we can discuss something or some insight that any of you has to offer, please don't hesitate to send that to us. Our email is theconfabulators@gmail.com, and we welcome any feedback or insight that you guys may have, especially on maybe some more hotbed topics as we go through these. Another thing I wanted to add in addition to that is that, as I said, we're going to get into some heavier topics this episode. That being said, I did want to just point you guys to some resources that if you or someone you know may be in need as going through these episodes, that you have those there. First, I would want to point you all to is for the crisis text line. If you are in a crisis, you can text MIND, that's mind, to 741-741. As well, there is the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. You just dial 988. And then also wanted to point folks to the Trevor Project if you're a part of the LGBTQA plus community for additional resources that are aimed more so at serving those within that community. Again, these are very important areas to us. And as we're going through, we're going to probably touch on some of these topics, not just in this episode, but in other episodes. And we want to make sure that if there's anybody out there listening or watching on YouTube that has a need or knows somebody that they know somebody who has need to get in touch with those who can help provide them with the support they need, that you guys can find that. And then the last, very last, I swear it's the last one, we'll let you guys get onto this episode soon. Last item I wanted to touch is Dave and I just became aware that there is some very uh, specific actions happening right now with Microsoft. We know that Bethesda is part of the Microsoft Corporation, and we are aware, and we did just become aware that there are some specific things happening with Microsoft in relation to the international events happening in Israel and all of that. I don't want to go too much into it, only to remind you guys that this podcast is first and foremost about storytelling and how we see it across different mediums. And that is outside of necessarily who produces it. You may hear comments from us here and there, especially because, again, these are organic conversations that are also led by our own personal perspectives and biases. But I do want to let you guys know that we are sensitive to the issue and just keep in mind that this episode, while we are talking about a Bethesda property, is about the storytelling in the property. If you choose to play the games or not, that is up to you. I know we sometimes do give our recommendations, but again, that is ultimately up to you whether to pursue them or not. And of course, that includes if you feel that it is the ethically correct decision to make given current political and geographical events going on. So we are very aware. We did just become aware as we're getting ready to finish off this episode and get it published live. So just keep that in mind. These conversations were also had completely outside of the current events. We do record these episodes in advance by several weeks. So given the current events of the day, we are aware that things can change very quickly from where we were when we recorded the episode to where we are now. So again, I do just ask you all to bear with us and have some grace, because first and foremost, we're here to talk about storytelling, which is something that is both near and dear to Dave's and my heart, and that we're very, very passionate about. And we want to be able to explore it in all its facets across all mediums. So, that being said, now that I've talked all of your ears off, and I know you wanted to get on to the episode, so I do want to just tell everybody that we're so excited to have you here. Again, we're about to talk about a franchise that's very near and dear to my heart. I personally love the storytelling in The Evil Within, so we're very, very excited to share that with you all. And please just sit back and enjoy the episode. Well, folks, howdy, people.
Hello, our little Voidwalkers.
Little Voidwalkers.
Uh,
Yep, and welcome, folks. We are here. I am Liz,
I'm Dave.
and we are the
We are the
Confabulators,
Confabulators.
who do not know how to synchronize our talking at all.
We do our best. We do our best. And you know what? Your best, sometimes that's all that matters, is your best.
Exactly. A for effort.
Yep.
We grade our quality on a curve.
Unless you're in a horror movie, in which case it's probably D for dead.
Yeah, well, Funny you should say that. So, for today, we are going to be talking about a personal favorite game of mine. Dave knows this.
Yeah.
He knows this. He has heard me talk and rant many a time about this. The Evil Within. Yes, and by extension, we will be talking about The Evil Within too, because of kind of the plot line, and since they're standalone games, but really they go hand in hand. You can't talk about the first one without talking about the second one. So, but
Yep.
Yeah. So I love you.
Would you like to explain what the synopsis is?
So, well, to start off the synopsis, I will say that The Evil Within, and because I actually, like I said, I joined the horror genre late, so I played Evil Within back in 2019, 2020, give or take. I think it was 2019 when I first played it. So just to give everyone an idea, that was about when I played it. For those who don't know, Evil Within, survival horror game. The first one was released in 2014. I looked this stuff up, so just to remember. So it was 2014. So that one was actually 10 years ago, which is kind of astounding. And then the sequel followed up in 2017. So little many things. Then so the synopsis is kind of a funny description, because from the experience when you're playing it, the synopsis is two detectives and their rookie go to investigate an incident involving a bunch of dead people at the mental hospital in what the fictitious Crimson City, spelled with a K, because we're going to be those people.
K is for cool.
Yes. They go to investigate. They're going to investigate these mysterious incident with a bunch of dead bodies in Crimson City at the mental hospital that in the game, Beacon Mental Hospital. By the way, folks, I'm wearing my little Beacon Mental Hospital. This is meant for Evil Within. No, I'm not wearing a cross. It really is not a cross. It's evil
Praise
in
be,
imagery.
praise be to Joseph. He died for our sins.
And then rose again.
Yeah.
But now no one can find him. But so it's you go to the Beacon Mental Hospital, bodies everywhere. So kind of classic horror game, mysterious mental hospital vibe, blood everywhere. They check the security footage, see a strange man murdering a bunch of cops. And then next thing our wonderful protagonist knows, he's waking up in like a basement butchery, but it's all human bodies. And there is a strange bag covered man face who speaks in grunts and groaning and general growling, um dismembering people. And it's hard to go on to the rest of the plot of the game because that synopsis essentially, that beginning essentially sets up the experience of the entire game, which is a clusterfuck of where the fuck am I? How did I get here? You're fine. And the next thing you know, you're falling sideways, Alice in Wonderland style, to another place. Throughout the game, you do find memos and things, newspaper clippings, things about missing people in Crimson City. You also have the protagonist's personal journals that you can find and read. He's coming across other people, but the whole game, they're all like, as you kind of encounter him and occasionally some of the other characters, you're all kind of trying to figure out what the fuck is going on. What the fuck is going on? Where are we? Because this doesn't seem like a normal world. And then, there's a whole bit of Matrix shit and it's all in your heads and it's Matrix, but you could die. If you die here, die in the Matrix, you die in real life. And then it's them trying to get out. So, and meanwhile, throughout the game, you're also unraveling the story of, I would say, kind of the explanation of where they are, but more so who is responsible for where they are. So, we've got our main characters. The lead detective, Sebastian Castellanos, which, by the way, shout out for the fact that they had, that this game had diversity within its own characters. I mean, Sebastian is Latin American. And then you have Joseph Oda, who's supposed to be Japanese Canadian, or Canadian Japanese. I'm not really sure what order that is, but I've generally been able to decipher that it's supposed to be like he's from Canada, but he's also part Japanese. So, who is the other detective, his partner? Julie Kidman, who's their rookie. And then you have also a few other characters, Dr. Jimenez, and then another odd cop. I can't remember his name at the beginning. And then, of course, our villain, Ruvik. Mm-hmm. So, but it is a game that I spent so much time going, this is chirpy as fuck. Because one minute you're in Beacon Mental Hospital, but all the patients are trying to kill you because now instead of patients, they're these weird zombie creatures with barbed wire wrapped around their faces and they're following you and murdering you. And you're like, what the fuck is going on? And I mean, literally, that's pretty much like Sebastian's main line. What the fuck? So, yeah, it's... There's my mediocre explanation of Evil Within, but I don't want to ruin too much because that's half the joy of it, is the what the fuck moments.
It's a good quick and dirty.
Yeah. It is a game that what I give a lot of credit to it is it's a game that does not waste time on the setup. And what I mean by that is you don't get a lot of explanation about anything other than, and not even really a bare bones of like who anybody is. You don't need a lot of explanation to quickly understand that Joseph, Sebastian, Kidman, that they work for police, that they're detectives. It's more just, hey, the first scene opens, some detectives are in a car with another cop going to investigate an incident at Beacon Mental Hospital. And that's about all the intro you get to anybody.
Yeah.
And then the game uses, the files that you find, the conversations and the cut scenes, and that's how you get to know the characters. And that is something I highly respect when a game does that, because why waste my fucking time in setup? And I think we went over this of like my opinions of Dying Light and how it took me like 2 hours to get out of the intro. I don't like it when, especially in a horror game, when they spend so much time on lead up, because it really takes away from the suspense. Whereas when you dive straight in, it's like, you're not even 10 minutes into, you are like literally not even 10 minutes into the game, and you are running for your life from this guy with a chainsaw in this like hellish maze.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
so
And to add a little bit there, I think that the way that they do that, the way that they sprinkle in the world building and the information related to the world, I think they do that quite well to where it's nice, seamless.
yeah,
Whereas a lot of other games don't really know how to do world building well. It's very clunky, it's very in your face, and
yeah,
it's very something that a lot of people can skip. Not to say that people couldn't skip in Evil Within, but because you kind of just like stumble upon these things in a more natural way, it doesn't really feel like you're skipping it. It just feels like you're taking it in, and if you desire to read it, unless you're like speed running it, like it's not going to be a bother either way.
exactly. Yeah. Like a lot of the newspaper clippings and some of the things, like one of the running locations in the game is, of course, kind of your one safe area, which is essentially looks like, this combination of kind of a small mental ward treatment area where there's a few cells, there's kind of a main room with a nurse's station, and behind the nurse's station are some rooms with it's again combination imagery because the room with the lockers looks more like body lockers from a morgue, but and then you have the chair and you do the brain juice. Okay, I'm gonna be right. I'm gonna go on a tangent right here because they don't really say what the stuff is in the first game, and then by the second game, they actually start saying, "Oh, your green gel that you collect by killing things and finding that is what you use to basically pay for leveling up different characteristics." No, it's fucking brain juice. I will die on this hill.
Yeah.
I will die on the hill that it is brain juice. It is not green gel. That is the worst name on the planet. They'd have been better to not say anything about it and just have
Yeah.
it be the thing they never mention but is there. But no, I think that, though I will say, I think there's at least like one time in Evil Within 1 where like the nurse goes, "Don't forget your green gel." Like she says it like once, but it's so offhand that you miss it. But
Hmm.
in that little lobby room, though, periodically throughout the game, one of the bulletin boards will have a rotation of missing persons posters, as well as headline newspapers on a rack. And you can read those things. Again, nothing is ever much. They're like very short clippings. Like it's not big bunches of exposition. But the thing I've noticed with the game is you don't even have to click on them to read them. You literally, they're the sort of thing that you can run up and you can read them just looking at them without actually examining them in game. So really the only times they have something that you're reading to examine, it's more specifically. So Sebastian's journals, which you can stumble upon throughout the game, they specifically place those right at those safe rooms, which I think is one of the things that again I think is clever, is that for something that's a little more verbose, Sebastian's personal journals basically provide a secondary backstory that is what I would say for the purposes of Evil Within 1 is not necessary, but it enriches the character because that's the chance for you to kind of see the character, because it's more him elaborating on his early career and his life prior to the incidents there, because the character we meet in Evil Within is like surly, grumpy, carries a flask with him, smokes. You figure probably smokes a pack a day. He's got the surly, grumpy detective, rough edged guy vibe. And then by the journals, you discover that no, he was like an eager young cop that made detective and then, fell in love with his first partner and they had a kid and then the kid died in a fire and he's all heartbroken, except the wife thinks there's a conspiracy. And then he's like, "Well, I don't know what's going on. I'm depressed." And she leaves him and he falls into drinking. For the purposes of the first game, you don't actually have to have all of that, but it really enhances the character that it's there. But the way they place the journals throughout the game allows you as the player to essentially, like you said, Dave, you can, if you're speed running or you just don't feel like it or you miss one, you can skip them. but they highlight them kind of like a, hey, if you're wanting to always, like, it's always highlighted in like red when you find it for the first time and you haven't read it. And so it's kind of the game's way of saying, hey, here's a little bit of background about this character. Because those are the only ones highlighted that way.
Yeah.
So, but again, you don't have to have them. Where those actually become more pertinent is in the second game. So it's kind of, and that's why it's hard to really talk about Evil Within 1 without talking about 2, because Evil Within 1 tells the backstory that becomes much more relevant in the second game.
Mhm. Yeah, and we'll get to that. Um,
Exactly. But yeah. Yeah, it's definitely fun little tidbit though. So it's a game that you will see the first one show up on a lot of like top 10 lists. It's generally regarded as being, I would say it generally falls into the regards with most folks as being one of the better horror games out there or one of the best. You know,
mhm.
certainly I will stand by that it has amazing replay value, and it is to me one of, I would honestly say it's it's a personal favorite. It balances horror, challenge, and all the things we love about horror, which is just a constant state of what the fuck is going on, and tension and survival, with plot, character, in-world lore. So, and
I will say, uh, I've played some of one. I haven't played any of two, personally.
mhm.
But I will say, once you get past how some of the controls feel, it's pretty fun.
It is,
Um,
it is.
I I think some of the controls are a little janky.
Some of them are, yeah. Going back and playing it, especially after I had like a break from gaming for a couple of years, it was like, okay, there's a little bit in here that's not perfect, but it's most of it is kind of like, but I can overlook that. So it's basically, so for folks who don't know, so Shinji Mikami was the director and kind of the big mind behind Evil Within 1, which if you know that name, he comes out of the Resident Evil world. So, and he's a big name in that world. So Resident Evil 4 was one of his babies. Um, and I'd have to go back and look, but he was fairly involved in some of the earlier Resident Evils as well. And then Evil Within were emerged actually from Mikami's own company, Tango Gameworks. So, which was, at some point, I don't know all the stuff about it, but Bethesda acquired them. So it's not actually obvious in the first game, even though I think Bethesda was still part of something with the production. Whereas by the second game, Bethesda was way more involved, whereas Mikami had stepped back. So, but and now I guess Tango Gameworks has like closed down or something. I guess it's this whole thing, or Bethesda just, or Microsoft closed down all these, because it's Microsoft, Bethesda, it's a whole, I don't understand that shit. I don't follow that. But so it's one of those things that I will definitely say, if you are a fan of playing Resident Evil games, especially I'd say anything 1 through 4, and this is original 4, though I would say I can wrap the remake 4 in with it too, because the remake is actually very close to the original. If you liked any of those, you're pretty much guaranteed to like Evil Within. It's a lot of the same strong points in those games in here. It plays more like Resident Evil 4 than like the earlier ones, but you still got a little bit of the puzzles, that the elements. But it's, again, it's one thing that I do think the Resident Evil games are also pretty good at, which is mixing horror and survival with in-world lore and plot, you know, and not being wholly dependent on specific things. That being said, Mikami's also apparently a fan of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which, if anybody wondered if there was a weird fetish for chainsaw wielding villains in Evil Within, or in Evil Within Resident Evil, that is why.
Mhm.
When I read that first time I read he liked Texas Chainsaw Massacres, I was like, and now I understand why there's a guy with a chainsaw chasing me. Although he
Yeah.
does get an upgrade in Evil Within at some point, and he gets a, like, what, like a bazooka, an RPG or something like that. you know, he's a rar guy. So, but yes, Evil Within. But oh man, so you said you've played a little bit of it. What were some
Yeah.
of your other thoughts while you were playing it, Dave?
Um, let's see here. Well, first off, I just looked real quick about Tango.
Are they
So
still around?
they were acquired by Microsoft in 2021.
Yeah.
Mikami left in 2023. I found a Reddit post where somebody posted 7 months ago that Tango announced that they were closing.
Yeah. So, which
So
unfortunately for fans of Evil Within has caused us to somewhat despair that there will ever be an Evil Within 3. I still hold out hope, but, and we will get into this, I have some specific expectations for Evil Within 3 if there's going to be a third one, because there were some mistakes made in 2 of elements that they really did a good job with in the first one that they just didn't do a good job with in the second one. And I think if they don't go back to some of that in the third one, then I'm gonna be pissed. Because I will hands down say that I do feel that Evil Within 1 is far superior to Evil Within 2. So on a lot of levels, not in everything. There's some things in the second one that work and that work well that the first one doesn't, but there is a lot more that I think one is just better at. So,
yeah,
but again, we will
I would
dive
agree.
into that. We will dive so far into that. But as far as Evil Within goes, so, uh, I will say this, the setting is the world, like just the world around it, like not even world development and lore. Visually, that game is a treat. And it's funny because it's all very, I would say it's very classic horror imagery. I mean, you get the church-like imagery, you get tunnels, catacombs kind of imagery. Um, you get the mental hospital, and you also get these weird villages, or they seem like old villages. So there's a lot of mix of medieval imagery and then very, old mental hospital warehouse. I do find the city part when you're going through like a destroyed Crimson City also to be really fascinating, because that's a strong deviation from a lot of the earlier imagery in the game. So, especially because that's a much brighter area visually. But
Yeah,
it's something to me that is very, very enjoyable, and the game has a way of literally throwing you sideways sometimes to where you're not even really sure what's going on.
mhm.
Um, Throughout the game, especially for a good portion, I would say of like half the game, you occasionally come across this weird um screaming creature that apparently goes by the name of Laura, but it's like Spider Lady of like spider limbs, ring girl's hair, and she just well, she does what all of us wish we could do, which is she communicates just by shrieking at you. And if she catches up to you, there is no ceremony to it. She just literally insta kills you by smashing your head into the floor until you turn into a bloody pulp. And I don't know what's more beautiful, the fact that there's just so much about her I can relate to, or the fact
Mhm.
that they actually show your head smash into a bloody pulp.
They don't hold back with the gore. I will tell you that.
They
That
really
is,
don't. I will say I love any game that does not shy away from brutally murdering the protagonist if you mess
mhm.
up, because like, you remember that time when I was playing and I accidentally walked into like an explosive tripwire, and if Sebastian walks into an explosive tripwire, it isn't just, oh, there's a boom and the screen goes dark. No, you literally see him in pieces.
Yeah,
And it's like, come on, guys, come on. I mean, it's an element that I love in Resident Evil 4, that if Leon gets murdered by Chainsaw Guy, it doesn't matter that he's pretty boy. You see him get his head chopped off by Chainsaw Guy.
yeah.
And this game is the same way. So, but they definitely, it's great the first time it happens because it's like you're not expecting it, but you're also like even more surprised to realize that there's his limbs.
Yeah. And it's pretty fun to see some of those, because like just the wild imagination that's required to be like, all right, we'll do this, and then there it is. You're just like, what the fuck?
Yes. Yes.
And then like, I don't know, like you kind of just start cheering. Like,
Yeah, it's more
yay.
becomes fun because it's almost like, even though you're trying to not die, it's also fun to see what new and interesting ways the game will find to murder you.
Yeah.
So, and especially because of the whole element of they don't elaborate it on. Okay, I should actually just go ahead and say it, guys. We're gonna spoil this game. So if you want to play this game at all, just like don't listen. Don't listen
Yeah.
to us. This
But
is gonna be.
come
Come back after you've
back
played it.
after.
Come back after you've played it, especially if you've played both of them, because we pretty much are going to spoil like all of the Evil Within. Like,
Yeah.
this is spoiler alert. Should have said that much earlier, but oh well, fuck it, we'll remember it. So, spoiler alert. Not shying away from anything here. It's all fair game. But so, oh my god, I forgot where I was.
Well, let me remind you, celebrating gore and cheering at the
Yes.
silliness of it.
Yes. So, um, but yeah, like going back to like, so like Laura and everything, like when she's chasing you and, killing you, all the moments when she gets you a brilliant, the times you get stabbed. And the beauty of this game is because you are running around. I remember what it was. When you're running around what we don't really get a lot of explanation of until the second game, though you get kind of a loose explanation in the first game that eventually you realize that the reason this world is such a clusterfuck of mixed imagery is because you're basically inside a mindscape space that is being more or less um orchestrated.
Conducted.
Yeah, conducted by
Orchestrated is good.
yeah,
Yeah.
orchestrated by essentially this sociopathic psychopath scientist guy who, had this whole thing. He got badly burned, basically everybody hated his family, and they set his family's barn on fire, not realizing that he and his sister, Laura, were inside. Laura died tragically in a fire, and this guy got badly burned and basically went crazy with rage. So, you're in this sort of virtual scape that he is orchestrating in there, and what you sort of realize, what really makes much more sense by the end of the game, when you've sort of had this whole other world elaborated on, is that what the reason the imagery goes from weird medieval to Crimson City to like all these different spaces is because Ruvik is basically using the memories of the people he's got trapped in this space with him, which also includes other mental patients. Remember all those dead people? So he's basically using content he gains from other people to create this fucked up mindscape. And then he uses that mindscape to really fuck with the detectives who come after him. So, and it's this whole thing of it's because he's actually trying to get out of the mindscape and find essentially you want to say like a host essentially for his mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, a host that would be
Yeah.
suitable enough for him, I guess, and impressionable enough for him to be able to kind of take over them and implant on the body and get out, because he no longer has a body because weird people, twisted, no moral scientists. So
Yeah.
everyone's
He,
villains, they're all trapped in a fucked up mind space. So imagine like the Matrix, except one guy, and that one guy said, fuck it, I'm throwing everything in here.
well, I would contest everybody being a bad guy. One person is not, and that would be Leslie, who
Leslie
looks
is
strikingly close to Ruvik in appearance.
That is the thing. And I hadn't thought of that, but yeah. And they also give Leslie, I almost would say they were almost aiming for sort of it's almost like they were aiming for an angelic quality with Leslie, but it becomes more ghostly than I would say angelic, because he's got the whole like pale skin, really like almost white hair kid. And so
Yeah.
they definitely want him to be like the innocent vibe. Like the true innocent in this entire plot line is basically this poor kid
I
who,
don't. So I am not somebody who deals with disabilities like Leslie has or anything like that. I would be curious to know what the community who fits within his disabilities would think of him.
yeah, or if he fits within, because I would say they went a bit. I would argue that they kind of maybe combined a few elements with him,
Mhm.
um, to yield something that doesn't explicitly look like any one disability. There's certainly an element where you're never totally certain what what it is with Leslie that he is in the mental hospital. Like,
Yeah.
the only thing I can ever kind of perceive about him is that for whatever reason, he can't function in normal society. Almost like something like severe spectrum,
He
but even
feels a
further.
little autistic coded.
Yeah.
Um,
But they don't
but
do it again. They don't
I
do it explicitly. It's like they take some elements that also you see in other mental illnesses. It's also like he's just extremely childlike and closed off.
yeah. Um, I I feel a little bit like they do it a bit better than most media does
Mm-hmm.
because you have a lot of media, especially like older media that just kind of takes that idea and just makes them like as they called it idiot savants back in
Yeah.
the day, um
You,
or or made them like dumb but not dumb in the sense of like you know
yeah.
uh,
With Leslie,
Rain Man,
yeah.
Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman and
What, Tom
Tom
Cruise?
Cruise
Yeah,
would
and
be
they,
like the example.
yeah, and they never paint him that way. Like, you definitely get the impression in the game that, like, you never Leslie is somehow surviving, but you definitely get the impression in the game that Leslie's survival is more a combination of the other detectives. So he like Julie Kidman, especially because which is more also elaborated on in the DLC, and also Sebastian, but also more that Ruvik wants him to get to a certain point. Like there's more an element of he's a tool.
Hmm.
Um so it doesn't feel like he's surviving because he's magically capable. It's more like the entire game, you get the impression that whatever Leslie's experience is very individualized to him. And as you uncover in the game, kind of through these early senses and implications, that it's actually that Ruvik is after Leslie because somehow that's the mind he wants to imprint onto so he can take over the body. It's sort of like, okay, we get it. There's not really, they never really say what it is that Ruvik identifies within Leslie that makes him choose that he wants to take over him. I would say there's some element of, I guess, of Ruvik determining that that's a mind where he can kind of push it aside and take over. Whereas, Sebastian Joseph Kidman, these are all minds that would be much more complicated to do that.
And that again kind of leans into like how much of that is like a story and stuff like that, and then how much of that would be like someone might perceive that as Leslie being neurodivergent, and so that's a weakness.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think in some ways this is a state where less is more really works in favor of the game in that there are certain things they don't explain, but you don't need them to. And because they don't explain them, as a viewer, you can kind of place whatever feels like a reasonable explanation on it for you, but you don't direly need it. But it also works by not creating any obvious direct parallels. That Leslie seems like he's got a mix, maybe, that he seems like he's maybe a combination of different mental conditions you don't know, but there's nothing explicit about him that to me makes it very obvious what he is. And so as a player, I don't find myself feeling like he's stereotyped either. It's like there's just enough there to that he stands out as a character a little bit, but not enough to take away from what his role is in the story. So again, less is more. And I think that's something that games miss sometimes, which is over explaining. Like we don't
Yeah.
need to really within the game, you don't need to understand why Ruvik specifically is targeting Leslie and why he wants Leslie for his host to understand that Leslie is somehow important to him. But he's not
Yeah.
important like this man needs him to fix the world or whatever. It's more like, no, Ruvik just wants this kid, this specific kid. And it's obsessive. And, it's what's more important is elaborating that Ruvik lacks the moral coding or the moral structure to himself to even care. about it. And I think that's what makes it important, what makes it work is that instead of elaborating on Leslie, we get more of elaboration on Ruvik to understand that this is a guy who just doesn't give a shit.
Well,
He is rage.
he's also just a giant brain.
Hmm. Later
So
on, yeah.
take
Well, that's because that's all that's left of him. He
take
is a
that for what
brain.
you will. Um,
A brain with eyeballs.
yeah,
So, but it's actually, you think about it, though, that's kind of that's the two common pieces of imagery that actually you get within it is eyes and brain, and it's the very specific imagery that's associated with Ruvik throughout the game that really is the other. As you get it more and more, you start to get that this is the hint that Ruvik is in control of this world. He
yeah.
is literally the brain behind this sort of maze. And some of the things you unwrap in the game is that he's also very much a scientist. They never really explicitly show it in the way that like they'll show some of the other like doctors, but with him it's very much he's a scientist. So he lacks this sort of code of ethics. They kind of elaborate that he's a scientist basically with no ethical code. So you also get the impression that he's watching also because he wants to, it's rats in a maze to him. He wants to see
Yeah.
what's going to happen. And he likes taking these people of these different backgrounds and just fucking with them by throwing elements of their lives at them. One could argue that that is the reason Sebastian finds journals of his, is that it's not just, for the sake of the game player or the viewer playing the game, that it's Ruvik's way of throwing Sebastian's own trauma back at him.
As well as bottles of wine.
Oh, yes. Yes. Yeah, because you can pick up and throw bottles.
Yeah.
So, so yeah,
Which
it's
I find that fascinating because, well, not the bottles. I mean that is fascinating, but the fact that Ruvik is a scientist with no morals,
mhm.
I don't think any scientist presented really has morals. Speaking of Jimenez, who until just now I couldn't think of his name, so my brain went Anthony Hopkins. Because he looks exactly like
So
Sir
we
Anthony
just fan
Hopkins.
cast Jimenez for the film adaptation.
Yeah. Like it look, y'all, you gotta look up Dr. Jimenez and then look up Sir Anthony Hopkins and just put them side by side. It's uncanny. Like,
There are some strong similarities, and also in Hopkins has an ability to play somebody who comes off as very genial, because frankly, when you first meet Jimenez, you think this is a good guy. And then it's later that you discover he's not a good guy, but he doesn't think he's a bad guy.
yeah.
And I think of Westworld Hopkins. Hopkins in the first season of Westworld is very good at playing a character that you start to realize is not the sweet older gentleman that you see.
I haven't seen that, so I will believe you.
No
Um,
worries, no worries.
but yeah. I mean, even Jimenez is not a very good person, and he's the one who's in charge of Leslie at first.
Yeah.
Um, and I think he's the one who killed Ruvik,
He's
if I read it right.
he was one of the ones when Ruvik is finally confronted by the Mobius team, because again, and some of these elements, Mobius more explicitly stating STEM, they get more elaboration in the DLC, the assignment, which follows Kidman throughout her kind of side of the adventure. That's where the first game does elaborate on Mobius involvement. So it's a good element to play through if you're going to go into the second game, because then Mobius becomes kind of the central element, or part of the central element behind it. But Jimenez brings the Mobius people in. They never totally go into the conspiracy of how Mobius is involved, other than you get very quickly that they are this sort of dark underground organization that is pulling strings in high places and has nefarious goals. More on that
Yeah,
later, because I have thoughts on how that unfolds in the second game, because I would say that the organizations presented in Resident Evil through their lore are superior. But again, we'll go more into that later. There is also a difference when you have a lot more games to build up lore. So,
yeah,
fairness, there's only 2 evil within games.
yeah.
Mobius
And there should
also
be
was apparently built in the I'm going to side tangent here again, because Mobius was apparently built in the Washington D.C. metro system.
Mm.
Why am I saying that? Because if you have ever been on the DC Metro, it looks like no other thing. Now, I want to say it was like Logan's Run or something was actually filmed there before they opened the Metro, the underground.
I I don't remember.
Something
It might have been.
I think it was Logan's Run. One of the older sci-fis was actually filmed there. If you have ever been to Washington D.C., the underground metro stations are unique. I have never seen anywhere else that looks like them. Not New York, not Chicago, but anytime a TV show wants to show DC Metro, they usually show you something that's New York or Chicago. They are not showing you DC because DC is fucking distinctive. It looks like you're in a sci-fi movie. It is these rounded tunnels, these weird rectangular insets into the wall that just go over and around you. It's these like octagonal floor tiles in this deep burgundy red everywhere. It is absolutely fascinating. I say that because if you play the assignment, they basically take the DC Metro system and say that this is the interior for Mobius, down to the signage and the fonts. And mind you guys, I grew up by fucking DC. I know that metro system. My brain twitches in the assignment because it just feels like I'm running through the train station. It doesn't feel like I'm running through an office building because I'm like, oh, where's Red Line? There's Orange Line. Are we at Metro Center? Because that's what it fucking looks like.
But
So,
hey, you'll never get lost.
exactly. But yeah, so there's a whole other organization that elaborates, that you get elaboration on through Nicole. You know what? I always want to call her Nicole because it's Julie Kidman, so I start calling her Nicole Kidman
Yeah.
through Julie Kidman storyline, but also the element of Mobius. They never really, I can't remember if the assignment actually explains kind of Mobius and Jimenez connection more so, but what you do get from just the main game is that Jimenez somehow connects with them, and they want the technology that Ruvik's developed. They want the system that Ruvik has basically helped to develop. And they're the ones who kind of come in and say, well, we want it. You know how to make it run, but we only need your brain, so bye, body.
Yeah.
They want him for his mind.
Literally.
Not his looks. Mind
That's
you guys,
true.
he's also like a mass fire burn victim. They don't want him for his looks, and I say that, yeah.
Well, you have all due respect. They don't.
They don't. I do have all due respect. Ruvik is also fucking ugly even before he's burned. So,
Well,
you know. He was an ugly child, okay? The game does not make you do him any favors at any point.
Well, I mean,
Yeah. He's definitely a villain that has a tragic backstory, but he is a villain that the game does a very good job at making you say, as a player, I feel like making you able to look at him and go, I can sympathize that he had a shitty childhood, but I do not actually feel sympathy for this character. It's like you can I can empathize that sucks that he experienced that his beloved sister died, but they make it very clear that you should not actually pity this person. You can mourn the fact that that makes Laura, the one who chases you throughout the game. She is the truly tragic character, which in some ways is a great move because you only get her tragedy through a backstory. As far as Sebastian's encounters with Laura, they are fucking insane. Because again, picture weird pale spider lady with like the ring face and hair, limbs bigger than human, and she just screams. Like that's all you know of how Laura's nearby is her going at you all the time.
Well, I think that's probably like the last bit of what stuck out for Ruvik whenever she died, as far as like most intense memories of her.
Well, and death
so
by
when she
fire is supposed to be
manifests-
one of the most painful ways to die. I remember reading that year ago that basically being burned at the stake and she died in a barn fire. She was trapped in there, guys. So she literally burned to death. And you do get a sound, especially because the game, and now that I think about it, the game is very twisted in their imagery, because one of the ways you can delay Laura, because that's the other thing the game does that I have to admit, it's challenging, but at the same time, I kind of love it about it, even though it's insanely challenging. Laura is not the kind of opponent that you approach the fights like you would a typical like Resident Evil villain. You know, a lot of games, you get the big gun, you hit the right spots, you take them out. Laura is only killable in the final encounter with her in the game, and she is insanely hard to kill. I have watched runs where they have killed her, and it is insane how basically how tanked out you have to be to actually kill her, and you still have to use every tool in the bag. Like every tool. But one of the common things they use is that you can slow her down. And oddly enough, the way you slow her down is by fire. You know, so it's a very twisted, again, this is a world that is meant to be like twisted Alice in Wonderland gone fucking wrong.
Mhm.
So, you know,
Um, weren't they in an incestuous relationship when they were in the barn and got locked in by the guys who were like pissed off at their family for being rich?
no, I never read it as that. I could see how a one-sided incestuous thing could be interpreted, but it would be one-sided from Ruvik to Laura, who, of course, at that time was going by the name Ruben. But I got the impression it's more like she's the older sister, and she's older than him by enough that she's kind of a caretaker and
Mhm.
more motherly to him. And they are
Okay.
playing, because the scene I believe in the barn is they're playing, because she's encouraging him of, oh, jump, I'll catch you and everything. But it's a very, like, he's very attached to her. So it's something that I could see they kind of play it as incest light. One, because the ages, because he's
Yeah.
played as younger than her by several years, but also more of a, if she is feeling caretakery, he is absolutely adores her. And that
Okay.
much I think is very clear. I think what gives it the kind of incestuous element is because what I would say the game does is they take his adoration for her before her death, and that's where it turns into an obsession. And then in the game, you know, of course, you see this in a lot of horror, and so you see it in this. There is a sexual element, but I think it's more the element of now he is a scientist, he is obsessive, and he's also obsessed with this rage and anger he's felt for the death of his sister. But I would say it's not overtly sexual, but it's kind of highly charged.
It's
It's
good
not.
to highlight
Mhm.
it's good to highlight this because some games and mediums and stuff like that will use that as part of a background for a character,
Yeah.
and sometimes they use it in a way that is disrespectful of the idea.
Yeah.
As in, like, they're not careful with it. They kind of use it as like something that's like an easy thing to just throw in there or whatever, to be like, oh, you hate this because it's incest, right?
Yeah.
As
I think,
opposed to like considering the ramifications and actually like exploring the idea of this act, why this act might happen, why it's bad, how it affects people before, during, and after, like things like that.
yeah.
It's very not carefully considered in a lot of spaces.
Well, and it's one thing
So,
that in this game, because the element of this STEM universe that Ruvik is orchestrating, there's an element you could make a case for the fact that Ruvik pre Mobius basically forcing him into STEM was probably of maybe a little bit more, it was obviously a little more grounded, a little more stable. And I say stable loosely because you do get elaboration during the game of all these missing people that you sort of come to realize were probably people that Ruvik has taken as test subjects, or has taken because they got too close to what he was doing. And so they have been disappeared. Oh, look, an experiment. But you could also make a case for is that in the world that Sebastian is in, because this world is drawing on the mental imagery from not just Sebastian, Kidman, and Oda, but also Jimenez, also Leslie, whatever bits and pieces may come from there, but also all the other mental patients, because you definitely get the idea that Ruvik put everybody in Beacon in there, or forced a lot of. He was using Beacon mental patients as subjects, test subjects, at some point or another throughout that you find out. And so you get the impression that this world is formed from mental imagery coming from a huge variety of people, which is part of why you get weird things like historical medieval looking imagery, but you don't really understand its context. But I think you could make a case too that some of the charged nature of how Laura is also a side effect of some of the minds that Ruvik is incorporating in. Because I would think you could say that within STEM, everything with Ruvik has also kind of gone off the deep end. And not that he wasn't already, but it's now you're throwing in all these other elements of rage, sexual charge, hormones, this, that, and combine that with a distinct trauma he experienced as a child in a very like pubescent age. Because I would say that the game kind of the way they show him, it seems like he's probably anywhere between the ages of like 10 to 12, maybe 8 to 12. But that's very prepubescent, pubescent. That's a distinct age to experience something as traumatic as your neighbors inadvertently murdering your sister and nearly killing you.
Yeah.
So, and actually something that I think is the games never overtly say it, but it is an underlying theme to me in the games, and it's maybe a little more clear in the second game, but it's because in the second game they're dealing more, I would say, with a little bit with the recovery time. Again, going on to the second game later, but I think one of the things you do see happening is the game is confronting of what does trauma do to people.
Mm.
And that is part of what I think is like interesting about getting the unwrapping of Sebastian's background, because as you're going through the game, you're seeing this gruff, surly guy, and then you uncover that his backstory is this truly tragic, traumatic background that also includes him basically nearly destroying his own career as a
Yeah.
result of trauma. I mean, he is an alcoholic when you meet him, or like I would say a barely in recovery alcoholic. I actually really like the scene when Joseph confronts him, and it's a well placed scene. This is a point where I say this game is really good at show don't tell. Because there's a one point in the game where you finally catch back up to Oda, and he catches up with Joseph. There is something wrong with Joseph. We're not really sure what, except that it seems like he and Sebastian are both sort of being like Ruvik's trying to transform them into these other weird demented creatures that used to be the mental patients that are trying to murder them. But it's the conversation they have when they're hiding in the house. And that is the only point in the game outside of any of the files, like Sebastian's journals, that is the only point of the game where the characters actually speak about the fact that Joseph submitted the internal affairs report regarding Sebastian's drinking. And I honestly think that scene is brilliant because it is
I
a
do.
well played way of putting a it's very strong character development done in a fantastic, like it's done in a way that it presents well in the scene. It's both the characters confronting their issues a little bit, but not truly confronting them, but having a confrontation over them and then having to turn around and get back to work. So,
It was really, really good. And I think the place where it was put in the story was
yeah.
chosen very deliberately.
Hmm.
And the fact that it was specifically in that one spot and only the one time
Yeah.
really makes it stick out all the more versus a constant barrages of cutscenes here and there with more dialogue, more story, more explanation of background and how characters are tied to one another through acting and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It was exactly what it needed to be, where it was, and it works.
It really does. And I think it's that scene that scene I would say has a lot of unspoken dialogue in it because of the way it's constructed, because it does come off in some ways as an there is some confrontation to it that's spoken, but it also in some ways comes off as here are these two characters who you are realizing in this scene, you are realizing that there has been tension building between them. They are supposed to be partners, but there has been a building tension over a personal issue. And that scene basically brings it to a head. And then very quickly puts in a position where they sort of drop it and step away. But I think that's a very clever way of kind of having these two characters finally move past their issues with each other. It doesn't take them past their issues in total, but it is kind of a moment where the two characters basically have a heart. It is essentially a heart to heart that allows them to air their grievances, and then they move on and they go back to doing what they're good at doing. Which makes it that much more tragic later when Kidman shoots Joseph. Again, we told you guys, spoilers. And you're going, wait, did Joseph just die? And, because it's called, wait, they just repaired their partnership. So it's definitely, it makes it tragic. And then it gets more tragic. Damn it, what happened to Joseph?
Yeah. Todd Howard, Microsoft, what happened to Joseph? I think you guys need to work together and get us a number 3.
You told us in 2 that Joseph's still alive. Why won't you tell me what happened?
Where's number 3 at, guys?
I need number 3. Also, please bring back Sebastian's original voice actor.
We need a petition for number 3.
Yes. Petition for number 3.
We'll call it the Oda petition. or the Joseph petition. Either one.
Jojo.
And yeah, we need Joe. And then that's great. We need Joe.
We need Joe. Hashtag we need Joe.
And then we'll have in there like a written description of like, yeah, we want Evil Within 3 because we got to know what happened to our boy Joseph.
I was gonna say they fed us just enough. Even the way they ended the first game, they gave you just enough to realize something's not right. Which is to say, which part of it being that, y'all, when Sebastian looks over at the tub that's supposed to have Joseph's not there.
My thought.
I'm going to go rage in a corner now.
My thought is that Joseph's a brain now.
That would make me sad. I had a thought. This is going to jump into Evil Within 2, because at the very end of Evil Within 2, you think, okay, he's destroyed STEM, Mobius. It's all like, all of STEM and Mobius have been destroyed. There's the whole thing of Kidman sends like the signal and it shuts it all down or something, whatever. The very, 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 very end, the last thing you see when it goes, when it cuts back to the screen inside the STEM center, and you see that screen come back on. And remember, the second game establishes that in the first game, Ruvik was being the mastermind was because he was the core. But he was also controlling STEM because he was basically a self-aware core, essentially, which is part of why that world was so fucked up. The second game establishes that Mobius came in and said, we want to do this, but we want a core that's going to do what we want to do that isn't going to run the show. That's where this whole conspiracy of using Lily comes in. Of this is the core that we can control because we can basically put her to sleep. Her mind acts as a base. We do all the show. We run the show. At the very end, because Lily's been removed, Lily's not the core anymore, and so you think STEM can't work without a core. And they've also destroyed the rest of STEM. But the end of the second game, there's that little bit where it's like something coming online. And this last time I played it, I have a theory that Joseph was an experimental core. That they took Joseph and used him as an experimental core.
Yeah.
And so my theory is that a third game would be looking at, wait a minute, there is a form of STEM, maybe not a good form, like not as established, like if Lily was like the perfect world STEM, according to Mobius, Joseph was the, let's see if we can take somebody that's more like Ruvik in that it's not a child, but still utilize them as a core.
Yeah.
So that is my
Which
suspicion. And that is my suspicion of why they implied that STEM was not gone.
which I'll put a pin in that for the end of discussing two. But before we move on the two, I do want to like bring up one other thing at the very least,
Mm-hmm.
and that other thing is the keeper, because of all the other bad guys that we have not mentioned, the keeper's probably the one that is the most popular.
He is. He is. He's very. I feel like the keeper, he is not on the level that Pyramid Head is, but there is a very strong similarity between the keeper and between Pyramid Head. You know, these faceless butcher type characters that are just stalkers, really. That they stalk you. And in the keeper's case, he uses a giant ass hammer. He doesn't have the sexual charge that, you know, and this is ignoring the people who post, you know, like sexually charged images and they'll sit there and go, look at Pyramid Head's ass here. Ignoring that whole side of the internet.
He's a baker.
Yeah.
Okay, he has a
Yeah.
lot of cakes available.
Yes, yeah. But there is, I always have felt like there's some strong similarity in what the keeper, there is some very strong similarity between the keeper and between Pyramid Head. It just like with probably the biggest difference being, and it plays into the design of the characters, is that the keeper is not sexually charged. Like I would say he is completely not sexually charged. I mean, you know, but there's that element of if you removed that charge from Pyramid Head, there's still a lot similar where it's this character that when it shows up, it's like you run. So, what are your thoughts on the
Um,
keeper?
well, I do remember there was a DLC that was put out where you played as him in first person,
Hmm.
if I remember correctly.
Yeah, because
Um,
he was the result of another victim
yeah,
within.
and I think his story involved like protecting a girl or something, if I
Yeah,
remember.
there was a
Yeah,
tragic element to it. Yeah, and that's where I say there's no sexual charge to the character, and I think that DLC in its own way elaborates that everybody you encounter in STEM that's trying to kill you at one point was a victim of it. I mean, in a way, even Laura was, even though we know that she has been dead since long before the game, but it's this sort of facsimile of Laura that has just been utterly ruined by Ruvik's own rage and the addition of these other minds that are not necessarily stable within this world and the rage that
which
he feels over what he considers other people have done to her. And so she basically becomes a translation of his own rage to hurt the people who took her away from him.
yeah. Which it's kind of funny that you mentioned that. It reminded me of Near Automata, which I haven't played, but I have had some spoilers for that occur.
Hmm.
And I know it's not horror, so it's probably not something that you would play anytime soon. Um,
You
but
know me well.
the quick and dirty is that you are this being who is assigned to go and deal with um these creatures or robots in this case, because humans are at risk of going extinct. And then as you go through, you see all these robots and stuff who have a lot of like human like qualities to them, who have things set up like towns and all that whatnot. Um, and as you go and you fight them, some of them act in like defense, some of them are scared, things of that nature. And as you work through the game, you discover that humanity's already been extinct and that these robots have kind of like taken up human qualities and are essentially the translation of what a human would be, and then you're going through and you're killing them all.
Hmm.
It reminds me a little bit of that in a weird way, that all these victims are being perceived as monsters.
Yeah.
Um, though Evil Within, they're going to be monsters because it's a horror game in the sense of like, yeah, these are enemies and they are there to fight you and kill you.
Hmm.
Whereas in like Nier Automata, I don't know if you can like do pacifism, uh, but if not, then like they're fighting to like defend themselves and such, as opposed to being actively trying to murder you.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the big difference. And I mean, though I will say that even though there's some element of, yeah, it's a horror game, they're trying to kill you. Again, I will say this game does a good job at taking what you could argue as, oh, well, it's a horror game, of course, that's there, and it gives a justification within the world. And,
Mm.
that justification being as you unwrap Ruvik's personality and how unhinged he is, but how much, so much of his research surrounds examining rage within the human brain and also isolating specific emotions. It's that whole scene when you're actually in Ruvik's home, childhood home,
Mm.
and you keep finding the brains and you have to probe them to unlock certain things. And
Yeah.
like the tapes that play along with it, clearly it becomes he's trying to isolate what parts of the brains trigger what emotional responses from people. So there is an obsession with rage that I think becomes very much an ongoing theme throughout the game, that these people who are being transformed, regardless of what their exact backgrounds are, what's being superimposed on them is this animalistic rage that Ruvik feels. I mean, Joseph's a perfect example because when he starts that moment, like the couple times where when he transforms and he tries to kill Sebastian,
Mhm.
that it's an element of, already this character would never, never, ever do this in control of his own mind. But then, especially, you go into the assignment DLC where you play as Julie Kidman, and at one point you are running from Joseph, who is like full, like anything he has felt has been like augmented by Ruvik's rage that's transforming him and creating a monster out of him. So these characters bring in their own issues and trauma, but it's like they're being brought in, but then Ruvik's adding his particular rage onto that recipe to change them from what they normally are, which is how you end up with Joseph, who that whole fight, or I say fight loosely, that whole thing where you're trying to survive Joseph and he is stalking Kidman with the axe is fucking terrifying. And also
Mm.
brilliantly done, because this is a character that you're sitting there going, I should not be scared of this character. And now I'm fucking terrified because it's like everything about him, but with a rage that's not supposed to be there.
That makes me think of the Scarecrow in Batman, but with
Mm.
rage instead of fear.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. Yeah.
and one of the stories that I think I saw this on in a video. Um, the best Scarecrow story is the one where he travels with Batman and he challenges Batman as far as confronting his fear, as a Batman's fear.
Hmm.
Because all he really wants to do is like study fear and what that means. And in a sense, it's very obsessive, just like how you're describing Ruvik with rage, and how they both have like these ties to those things,
Hmm.
and how because of those backstory bits, they feel compelled that they have to explore those things.
Yeah.
Granted, they have like certain different goals, right? Like Ruvik is just trying to find a new body to get out of being a
Hmm.
brain.
But it all
Um,
stems from repeated incidents that his response more and more becomes this deep, unseated rage, this deep, deep, deep rage
mhm.
to and basically desire to hurt people.
Yeah. So I just thought that was really fascinating
It is.
as
It
you were
is.
going on.
Yeah, it is. And I think it contributes to this element of the ways people, again, it goes into what I think is an underlying theme in the game, which is how people deal with trauma. Because Ruvik is very much, in this regard, Ruvik is the foil. And, if Sebastian's the protagonist, Ruvik is very much the opposite antagonist. Sebastian experienced this insane trauma. First, your child dies in a fire. So, there's a parallel of something they both cared very deeply about, died in a fire. You know, Sebastian loses his marriage after that because his wife is firmly believing it's a conspiracy. He is wanting to move on. And so gets the trauma of a relationship falling apart, and not, like through any like, oh, they got divorced. It's like, no, their relationship has fallen apart because of this trauma. And also because his wife has become obsessed with the conspiracy. So this element of him having it whispered into his mind by other people that this wasn't an accident, but that his response is self-destructive. And you get the impression that there is a certain level of rage that goes along with that, but that he still goes in and does his job. Whereas Ruvik's response is this very, very, very traumatic experience as well. He loses somebody he loves in basically the most painful way possible. He stays calm. It appears to stay calm, kind of as you add up that as a person, he takes it, internalizes that, and kind of comes off as a more still is less self-destructive, but quietly becomes more externally just destructive. So if Sebastian's coping with trauma is very self-destructive, his drinking habits, his behaviors, how he relates to other people, how he interacts with them, but he still goes to work and does his job. Ruvik's is he doesn't self-destruct, but he turns that rage outward to hurt other people. And it's both of them it's very much a look at what anger and rage look like when it's directed at yourself versus when it's directed outwards. Because one could argue both of their reactions are very realistic reactions to extreme trauma and loss, especially loss that you couldn't control. But also, I think one of the things that they're sort of on the other side implying is Sebastian could have gone the way of Ruvik. He could have become pissed, at everybody else. So it's a very, they're very much set up to be opposite sides of very horrendous experiences.
Yeah.
And then, how they direct that anger, because Sebastian's anger, when it comes up, becomes more of an anger that I'm mad because people I care about are being hurt and I want to stop the people who are causing the hurt. Whereas Ruvik is, I'm mad because something hurt me and I'm going to make everyone suffer because of it. So,
I can see that.
Yeah. Again, if you guys haven't already gotten it, this is why I like The Evil Within. There are layers to this game. There are layers that you can continue to peel back on these characters just from what the game has given you.
Like onions.
Yes. Except they don't maybe taste better than raw onion does.
I don't know.
I had to try
maybe.
it once.
Oh, really?
Side thing, when I was in youth group as a kid, we would get volunteered for skit activities, and it was basically musical chairs, except we were passing a piece of fruit around, and if the music stopped on you and you were holding the food item, you had to take a bite of the food item, except occasionally the food item was something horrendous, and yeah, it stopped on me, and I was holding a giant ass raw onion and had to take a bite out of it.
That sucks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is something I did at church.
Now I'm a non-believer.
No, it wasn't that bad. It was funny. We all knew what was going to happen. It was, I was happier that I got the onion than some of the other things people had to bite into. I'm pretty sure somebody else had to bite into a jalapeno.
Oh, well, that's not so bad. But then again,
unless you're like a suburban high schooler who didn't taste spicy food.
Well, yeah, that would be different. But
I think that person suffered far more than I did having to bite into a raw onion. Also, because I just took a small bite and got it over with, and then I spit it out.
Fair enough.
Yeah. By the way, raw onion burns.
I believe it.
So that is
given how the reaction when you're cutting hits your eyes, I believe it.
Yep. So that all aside, okay, I'm gonna derail us and talk about something else that I love about Evil Within. Or that just, it is something that I think we brought it up last week about what makes a good horror movie or horror game. the sound design. And honestly, the scene design too. Like lighting, basically lighting, color, and sound. Like these very
Yeah.
basic elements, but they work. But there's a sound design element that's very particular with Evil Within. And it's the crunch. Because Evil Within has the fun component that if the villain is knocked down, Sebastian can kick things. It's not a specific move, but if like you go to break open a barrel or something to get whatever is inside, he either hits it or he kicks it. And when he kicks, he doesn't really kick. He stomps, like he curb stomps. Like when he goes to hit the barrels and he stomps them. But you can also do that if you knock your opponent down. You'll get a trigger command to basically stomp them. And he doesn't just like, he'll kick them. He does kick them sometimes, but for the most part, he stomps them. And the crunch, they had fun with that.
Yeah.
It makes me so happy.
He really puts his hips into it like he's been doing Taekwondo for a long time.
I mean, he is like literally like, I am going to stomp your face and you are not getting up. And it is brilliant. And the sounds make me so happy. It is just the sounds of bodies bursting and juicy gore. And I now sound like a psychopath.
The sound design and atmosphere is really well done. They knew how to capture everything and make it like pretty unsettling in places.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I honestly enjoy the fact too that the way they give these villains, I mean, we keep coming back to the rage thing, but they use these elements of, it's not like monster villains. It's like that make monster sounds. They make very human sounds. Like Chainsaw Guy just is like, but it's like, again, it's a rage sound. It's a human sound. It's an implication that there might be a person here. Keeper says nothing, but the Keeper, you get the footsteps, the feet, the wet thud if he hits you with his bag, or his hammer when he hits his own head with it.
Yeah.
Of course, Laura, we've touched on the screaming, So it sort of gets me. It gets me. There's also that weird blood creature thing that is like half Laura, half Ruvik that just like, if it sees you, it like is this weird demented demon thing that just like chases you and absolutely is just like doorway to hell almost.
Yeah. So
but yeah.
What about that final fight? Which I haven't personally gotten to. I'm still stuck in the town with the water monster, but
the
final fight.
The very final fight to me, it is not what I would call typical boss fight, but I think it's more because, and it's very in keeping with the game, which is not, now that I think about it, I think there's only a couple fights in the entire game where you truly are fighting your opponent. And I'm thinking of the garage fight, the big ass creature in the garage.
Fuck that guy.
Yeah, right. Technically, actually, Chainsaw Guy does, there's a couple encounters with him where you do actually fight him, but he's kind of a lesser boss once you get the hang of it. He's not actually, you just don't slow down. Hit him with a lot of power right away and he goes down. But basically, this is Evil Within's approach to a boss fight is less, let's put one big ass boss here in multi stages. And instead, I would say, let's have a lot of little fights and elements that are particularly challenging. Evil Within also really leans into chase scenes. That is another thing. And they utilize that heavily throughout the final boss fight. But even these elements where there are plenty of times in the game where your best option is to sneak around, or you have to crouch and sneak because you have to go under something that could kill you. And I think what they do that I find clever, even though, is that the final boss fight is more really just, it's the whole last chapter of the game. Because it's really these different stages that are moving you closer and closer to finally confronting Ruvik. But Ruvik isn't also one, they visually make it big, but again, it's not a typical fight. I mean, absolutely floored me the first time I played it when the very specific element is that Ruvik grabs Sebastian and throws him, and Sebastian gets impaled on like steel rebar. It's like, whoa, this is like a straight up, we're killing this character move. Because you aren't really chasing Ruvik or shooting him. It isn't until that part that you're given a weapon that you can actually hit Ruvik with.
Yeah.
But it's different. It's definitely less overt boss fight, but it is played in a way to have the scale of a boss fight. These different stages and elements, which I like that. I like it. It's not easy to do.
Mm.
I wouldn't say they execute it perfectly, but sometimes that just depends on how you've been playing the game and how far when you come in. If you don't come in with, like, say, enough ammo, it's not necessarily that it's their fault. It's that, whoops, I don't have enough of the thing that I need to get through this. So it's not impossible to get through, but it is challenging. It is kind of everything you've been encountering put on steroids, and with some distinct elements of you have to do this to get to this, but be careful of this because this thing could get you. And I like that. I like that. It's nice to see them approach the final boss fight not in what I would say is the traditional, like the typical video game style, which is let's just stick big bad here. Evil Within, it's definitely very different from like what Resident Evil does, which is typically the final boss fight is literally, here's the final boss. You might fight 4 different stages of the damn thing, but they're more conventional, like you are going to fight the creature. Whereas this
Yeah.
is much more of, we are going to eventually give you a creature, but we're still going to limit what you can do because the only way you finish this is this way. And you can still fail at it, but it's one thing. It kind of goes along with something that I've noticed this game, Evil Within, does. The first Evil Within specifically does that I didn't really realize it until most of the way through the first time I played the game, which is that the game does not immediately come off as linear,
Mm.
but it is actually very, very linear.
Yeah.
But like, where, like, example, Resident Evil 3 remake. That game also incredibly linear. Like, I would say equally as linear, but 3 is obvious linear. It's like, okay, this is obviously linear. This is what I have to do, that they're telling me where to go, blah, blah, blah. Evil Within is like, I remember the first time thinking, am I making the right decision here of where to go? And kind of feeling like, how am I knowing where to go? I'm kind of just guessing and things are happening. And part of it's because they utilize that element of Sebastian being chased.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually really like the way they utilize it because it forces you to, you don't really think about what you're doing. You're just running away,
Mm.
but they're opening the doors. So it's a very manipulative kind of setup, but it's actually cleverly played, I think.
Um, I
Mostly.
felt like I
It's more linear in certain parts, but there are parts that, like early on in the game, where I felt like I remember sitting there being like, I don't know what's going on and how I'm getting from place to place, except that I'm just stumbling onto things.
I felt like I noticed it more. Um,
Hmm.
and that's not to say that it's a bad thing necessarily. I know people make jokes about certain games that are like Final Fantasy 13 was called the hallway simulator because of how linear it was.
Yeah,
Like you
yeah.
literally could not explore anything. You were just bam, straightforward. Um, but I will say with like Evil Within, some of that I think would be tied to, if you were to ask the devs, I think some of that would be tied to like just in terms of fluff. Ruvik is designing things as you're going forward.
Hmm.
And because of that, he's designing things more linearly and kind of like throwing things at you as the character.
Yeah,
There's only certain moments in time where he might have moments where he can just like set up something a little more complex. Like, for example, when you're in the village and
yeah.
you meet Dr. Jimenez
Oh,
and you
yeah,
have to beat the one chainsaw guy in the barn,
yeah.
right? That's a
But
little bit more complex than, say, just going down a hallway.
Yeah.
Um,
Like even in some of
but
the office space, like or the office space, the
yeah,
the
the
office
city.
buildings in the city. Yeah, there's elements where it's like he's pulling from a more complex environment. So as a player, you feel like you have more control over the decision making.
Yeah. And the mansion as well. Like it's not completely hallway
Yeah.
linear because you can decide which one you go to and which one you kind of find and stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but I do know I feel it a little more. I notice it a little more. Um, just because I know I'm just going from point A to point B, and so it kind of sticks out for me a little bit.
Yeah.
But
Would you
that's
say it
not
also made a
necessarily
oh,
made what
I would say would you say it made a difference too that I think you'd seen me play some of the game too, so for you it was like you'd seen bits
more
of it at
obvious.
least. Yeah. I'm just wondering because for me it was completely I knew nothing about it when I went in.
Yeah,
So I didn't know what to expect. The only thing I knew to expect was that people said if you liked Resident Evil 4, you'll like this, and that it was an over-the-shoulder style combat.
I'll say
That was
yes.
all I knew.
I'll say yes. I definitely think that if it wasn't for the fact that I saw you play it, I may not have been as readily able to notice it.
Hmm.
But then again, it's kind of hard to say
Yeah.
because I can't go back in time and be like, all right, Dave, in the past, sit down here now. You play this game.
Yeah.
Don't talk to people about it. Just play.
Hindsight's always 2020. And I think
Yeah.
whether a game is linear or not is a very subjective thing unless it's like straight up side-scrolling platformers, where you only have one option
Yeah.
like this. But what I find is that what it is the element that stands out to me is that even when the game is giving you more room like to explore or to do things in the order that you choose, like the mansion, you don't have to find the three brains in the exact order. You
Yeah.
have to do a couple things in like a particular order to get to somewhere, but there's not as much of an exact science to that. And because Ruvik could randomly appear and chase you, and there is literally no way of surviving, you just have to run away. It throws an element of whatever order you're going to do things in could get completely disrupted if he shows up.
Yeah.
So to me, it's a very to me is a very it's a clever way of giving the player the feeling of more control over how they play the game, even though there is very much even though you're really not that in control. You're
Yeah.
not in as much control as you feel like you have. And I think that's the thing that stands out to me is that it's a little bit of a you almost feel and in some ways I feel like they did it in a way that it echoes what the characters are experiencing. Of they're going through it trying to make decisions based off what's around them. What you slowly unravel through the game is that really they're all being manipulated by this singular mind.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it is it's sort of they found a way to meld the gameplay enough to give the player enough of a perception of control to feel like they to feel confident in in maneuvering through the game while still really saying, no, you're going to get to the places we want you to be when you want you to be there. Because I remember feeling that the first time I played it and feeling like, okay, this is moving along, but I don't really understand how I'm moving the plot along because
Yeah.
I'm just winging this. And then realizing after I played the game, oh, that was always the way it was going to go,
Yeah.
and to me, that's actually very clever because it's hard to do that within a game, I think, and do it very effectively. It helps that the game relies on an element of being highly random in the sense that because it's not just like it's not Leon going through the south woods of Spain in some rural podunk area of Spain where it's like obviously he's going to encounter certain things, but there's certain things he won't encounter, and we have to have an in-world explanation for what he encounters. Otherwise, why the fuck is this even here? This, because it's a mental universe, there's a little more freedom for them to play because as you unravel things, you start to realize that this world doesn't make sense. The
Yeah.
only way this world makes sense is to understand that it's being controlled by a psychopath
Mhm.
who's getting a preview into the minds of all these different people.
Can
And
can I just side tangent kind of Okay, so in the mansion, you're
Hmm.
going along and you're trying to do the three things. The one thing that I will probably never stop complaining about. And I look,
I've heard you
look,
complain about this.
look, I get why from what you've explained, like I get why, but I still push back against it. For those of you who don't know, in the mansion specifically, when you're trying to get to the three different brains and put the needle in there and then get through the door, during that whole time, there are moments where Ruvik can randomly begin to appear, and if he catches you, it's an auto kill.
Yeah,
You just die.
yeah,
And it could happen the very moment that you start from whatever checkpoint you're at. It could happen the moment that you step out of the safe zone.
yeah.
It could never happen. It,
There is
it may
no.
never happen.
I think it happened once or twice to me. I think it happened to me once the last time I played it. Whereas I have had runs where it has happened to me so many times that I have definitely died a few times and had to start saving like every 2 seconds because it just kept happening.
Yeah. And look, there are places that you can hide. That shit don't matter to him. Like he still finds you and he still kills you.
You have to get ahead of
And
him enough that he doesn't see you hide.
right, but look, I would more respect that if he was a more active presence in the mansion, where say you had to loop him, to borrow a DBD term, and find a place where you can like dodge him or avoid him and then go hide.
Hmm.
And then when he loses you, he leaves the area, and the blue aura that you see that you recognize as he's in the area fades off, which means he's gone to a different part of the mansion to see if you squirreled away over there. Then he's not there, and then suddenly here comes this blue wave, and here he comes, which disrupts everything you got going on. I would more respect the one way than the other,
I
the one that we've got.
I would say that would be a very interesting. It changes the mechanic of that because it is a very much it is a very randomized encounter. You could encounter him once, barely at all. You may encounter him several times. You have to admit, an element like that, where he was moving around the mansion and you at least could, by some extension, like there was a radius in which like his presence could be known.
Hmm.
That to me is interesting. And I have to admit, I'd be curious to see how that would play. I think you'd have to increase his presence to really up the ante on that. But if it adds the element that if you get into a radius of his presence, he becomes aware of you. So now you to get away from you also have to get out of that radius.
Sure.
Which
Yeah.
use the environment. And because the mansion still has other, I think they call them haunted in the game in it, that can attack you, you can get held up because if you get caught by a haunted and his radius. So that would be really interesting. And I think that would enhance the way that plays. It's definitely an element where I could see what they were trying to do. But it's more 50-50 on whether it lands, especially because it is dependent on such a randomized factor, which is how often is the computer going to drop Ruvik in within the vicinity. And especially
And
because it's just the aura is like Silent Hill. It's the whole damn mansion gets covered in this aura. So when that happens, you just know that he's there, but you're really not actually sure where he is. Because I discovered that the hard way when it was like, oh shit, there's the aura. I'm gonna run, and I ran right into him.
yeah, and
You
I've had
know?
that happen too.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, and there's one other thing in this game that feels like when it happens, it makes me declare out loud bullshit, and in a way that is frustrating, not in a good way.
What?
Not
Okay.
not
What
good
part is that? I
frustration.
feel like you may not have mentioned that one.
So the other one, and it's a lesser one, and it's kind of also tied into two, but stealth, stealth kills,
Yeah.
right? So stealth kills can happen in both games.
Yeah.
In this one, they start you with stealth killing, and that's fine. It's hard to pull off a little bit,
It
but
is.
you get opportunities.
Yeah.
Then after one or two stages, they drop the chances for opportunity, just completely gone.
Yeah.
And it's it's a very frustrating thing to get a mechanic introduced in a game and then they throw it out the window like it never existed. In that case, either just get rid of it altogether or give us more opportunities. Because
Yeah.
I think that in a game like this, there's great opportunities to use that stealth kill as tension.
Yes.
And in the later levels, there's a lot of really good spots where that tension could be very effective, especially if you're having to get away from a boss and then you see a dude who's standing in a hallway with his back to you. You got to figure out how you're going to get through there quick. And one of those ways that could be rewarding is a stealth kill.
Yeah. They
Like,
do they do kind of there's a few, like, obviously the first few chapters of the game are, I think, heavily allow you to heavily utilize stealth kills. I mean, the whole village with Chainsaw Guy, the first time you encounter him, you can do a lot to help yourself through that area just by relying on stealth before you actually start triggering, like, everybody to en masse appear. And it's really helpful for that scene, for that whole part of the game, because you do make your life a lot easier if you can manage to get by stealth killing. Because they do this, the first game does make it kind of harder to actually accomplish a stealth kill. It's not always a guarantee. You can be doing really well, and that's just the guy catches you, and you're fucked. But I can only think of maybe one bigger part in the late portion of the game, maybe two, that because they're right next to each other. Their chapters are right next to each other, which is when you have to go get the hemostatic bandage for Joseph, because through that car area, I fucked it up a lot the last time I did it, but that is an area that I have also used stealth kills more heavily going to the ambulance,
mhm.
But it's also because it's an area where they project. Here's a lot of guys already wandering around, so you kind of get a little bit, it sort of is, it's almost like they kind of tell you, you can use stealth kills here. And then the other part is in the apartment complex in the chapter immediately following that one, when you've got that weird Ruvik thing, but you're also sneaking around the apartment complex. Um, there are some more opportunities in there, but it's not a lot. Yeah, you're right. After the first several chapters, you aren't really given much opportunity to stealth kill. They sort of forecast you a little too obviously
It's
to the
it's
opponents.
kind of yeah, it's kind of like they want you to use stealth kill at first to give you enough brain juice to push into a weapon, and
Yeah,
then you just using that weapon. And I don't think that that's good. I think that's bad game design.
yeah. It
It,
was
in
not
part
well played on mechanics.
and here in part because if you're going to introduce a mechanic like stealth kills, especially that early, well, or at all, like have it opportunities throughout the entirety of the game. It
Yeah,
doesn't have to be 100%, but give us at least some opportunities. Two, weapons in this game, even on the easier modes, ammo is scarce.
it
Ammo
is.
is very scarce.
Yeah,
And when you're playing like that and you go, all right, well, you're this far along. Guess what? Stealth kills, they're out the window. You got to rely on your weapon. If you pump all your brain juice into one weapon, which I don't know when you get the shotgun versus the pistol, but if you have the pistol and you're pumping all your brain juice into the pistol and then you run out of ammo and then you just have basic shotgun, it doesn't feel good. It
no.
feels very bad.
Yeah,
And so you can't even like go to your backup of stealth kills to help you out
yeah.
when
You pretty
all
much,
you've got is nothing.
yeah, and you do pretty much start out with the pistol. That is the automatic weapon they give you right at the beginning.
Yeah.
The shotgun, I believe, is the second weapon. Um, you get it in the village somewhere.
Yeah.
Um,
And look,
but yeah, it's
punching punching don't do shit even if you max it out.
you have
Like
to
it helps
really,
you early on,
yeah,
but after those early stages, it doesn't do shit other than like I'm out of ammo. I need to hit this dude and run.
yeah. Well, it's definitely they set up his melee abilities, hand-to-hand melee abilities, as really like instinctively. I think sometimes for those of us who like to not use ammunition, we try to rely on that. You've seen me try to use that to beat a guy, but really, all they're meant to do is to be. I think all they're really meant to do is to be a way to stun your opponent to
Yeah.
create space, which it's which I mean I like that element that you know in terms of kind of a human element that for him melee combat isn't hand to hand combat isn't and end all. And in some ways, I like that. I like that element of you you have to use this ability correctly because it's not meant to kill your opponent even at its most maxed out point. But it does sort of defeat things when the way that you can have a more stealth or hand-to-hand kill, the stealth kills, isn't, you aren't able to use it a lot. And yeah, it is kind of a loss there that after about 2/3 of the way through the game, all your encounters are so projected that there's really no way for you not to encounter face to face.
Yeah.
Either because you're encountering a whole horde, and so it's called, well, yeah, you can't stealth kill because even if you could stealth kill that one guy, four other guys are right there and they're gonna kill you. So
Yeah.
the only other, I not thinking about it. There is one other area that is very strong on stealth kills. I mean, basically the other area within the game that does lean back into allowing you to use stealth is in Crimson City, because that's a little bit more maze-like. So in some ways you do get more opportunity there than you've had for a while in certain other areas. But the area that really is kind of the exclusive, this is the area where you need stealth to survive, is that warehouse where they specifically say, with the Ghast warehouse, where they straight up say, if you use a sidearm or you light a match, you are dead.
Yeah.
Because this gas is flammable. And they put a big fucking bat in there on one side, and on the other side they put up a lot of other guys, which means that's about the only part later in the game that really says if you don't have stealth, you're fucked. But it's because in that regard, they take away everything else that you can use to survive. So if you've not been using stealth up to that point, you're more fucked just because you're not accustomed to utilizing stealth. um, but otherwise, yeah, it is a little bit frustrating that they go from creating a lot of opportunity for you to utilize it to sort of dropping it and
Yeah.
only bringing it back on occasion, especially because, frankly, it's so satisfying when you can stealth kill things. Like when Resident Evil started creating opportunities in some of their games for you to stealth kill, I got so happy. Like, honestly, the fact that it took any Resident Evil game so long to have a stealth kill option, and it's only in some of the games.
Yeah.
It's like, but come on, stealth kills are so satisfying.
They really are. And like it's in almost every game, because one of the things I think is so much fun and just it punches your dopamine button like the fist of the North Star is when you can get a stealth kill on someone or something. It's just there's nothing like it. Like
Oh my
in,
god.
in Dead by Daylight, for example, there are stealth killers in there. And when I'm playing one of them and I happen to like Ghostface,
Oh my gosh,
you
yes.
stalk someone up from a different angle, and then you see them run, and because they don't know where you're at, and they run in a direction that's like around the corner to where you're at, and you just like swing on them, they just shit their pants.
Yeah.
And
They
it's
were probably just like,
amazing.
oh fuck, oh fuck. I
Yeah,
love it. I love it. Yes, it's
it
so,
feels good.
and as somebody who generally only runs Survivor, I think it's great. I think it's absolutely great because I cannot predict it. I will be sitting there being like, "Oh fuck, I'm gonna die. Oh good, I make it. I make it. What the
Yeah.
fuck?" Because there's no getting away from that. I love it, but I might be slightly addicted to the adrenaline rush that happens there.
Yeah. All right. So
So yeah,
that's
no, but that's a
that.
fair thing to be like, because that is, yes, we are talking about what is a personal favorite game for me, but that doesn't mean there isn't room to improve. And that's where, why we're talking about the sequel in conjunction with it, because the sequel, as sequels should, I think, frankly, in gaming especially, sequels should experiment with expanding the player's abilities and experience of the game. The sequel, however, doesn't succeed in areas where I know they tried to. Okay, I know. Seamus, you're whining. I know. He's behind me. I hear him go. But and it's tough. It's frustrating when a sequel doesn't succeed. I have been pleased to see that online, at least in like Reddit forums, a lot of people actually generally responded really well to the sequel. I personally was more disappointed by it. Um, and I guess, like we can start to kind of go into that because that plays into what works with so well with Evil Within 1 is what
Yeah.
didn't work that they did in Evil Within 2. So, uh,
So we're going to Evil Within 2.
I think we're going to start
Let's
kind of
roll.
talking a little bit about that since again, it's hard to talk about why like, for me, it feels hard to talk about why I feel like Evil Within 1 is such a good game without talking about Evil Within 2 because they did try to do some things differently and I commend them for that. Not all of them landed. And in fact, I would say a fair few of them didn't land to where I honestly will say the first is the superior game. Period.
Hmm.
End of story. That is my opinion. Not everybody agrees with that, and I would absolutely relish if any of you think that Evil Within 2 is the superior game. I'm not saying that you're wrong because everybody has their likes and dislikes, but I really actually want to hear what you like about it. I always like to hear like people's reasoning behind why they enjoy something better than something else, especially if it's different from how I feel. I think 1 is better, but if you have, can, tell us like why you liked 2 better if you did, please let us know or tell us what you liked about 1.
Yeah.
So that all aside,
See the link in the description for a way to send us contact stuff.
yes, we always love hearing these opinions, but that all aside, so as we said, Evil Within 2, like some of the lore and plot that you get in Evil Within 1 in the background becomes important in Evil Within 2. So Evil Within 2, quick synopsis. It's 3 years, what's supposed to be 3 years since Sebastian escaped from the STEM thing, Beacon Mental Hospital. Ruvik is basically dead. He and, Julie Kidman got out, but you also by this point know that Julie Kidman was involved in this, organization that is what put Ruvik in there. So you know that Julie Kidman was a traitor. But somehow she also helped Sebastian at the end. So you're a little bit like, who is this woman? Because obviously she was not trustworthy. She comes in, the game basically opens with her finding Sebastian, who has not really managed to crawl out of the bottle. In fact, he has crawled back into the bottle in the last 3 years because now he's traumatized from STEM and still doesn't have his wife. But he is also at this point now where it's been implied where, you've been revealed by this point at the end of the first game that his wife had found evidence to suggest that their daughter wasn't dead. But he still doesn't really believe it. But either way, he knows there's big bad guys. He basically got shut up, forced out of his job, and he's a drunk in a bar. Weird Matrix dudes and Julie Kidman show up, and he's like, the fuck you guys doing here? You the bad guys. And they're like, and she's like, yeah, but we need you. Because by the way, we're responsible for your kid who's not dead being taken away. So we fucked you, but now we're fucked, and we need you to come help unfuck us. And by the way, the bribery is come get your kid. So that's my rough and dirty description. Basically, in the game, you have to go. You get found by Kidman because you need to go back into fucked up world, STEM world. Except they're all like, no, it's not so bad now because Ruvik ain't running it. In fact, actually, it's technically being run by Lily. Except we're running it. We just use Lily's brain as like the device. So by the way, we kidnapped your child to use them for mad science experiments, and something is going wrong. Come get her.
Yep.
And then the game unfolds from there. However, what this game does, right off the bat, something that this game establishes very differently, or doesn't really establish, but what you figure out quickly in this game is that there's more than one villain. And we're going to go into why that doesn't work. Or at least why it was poorly played. Because it is one of the things I think, Dave, you and I both can universally agree on is that it's okay for a story to have layers to the villains where there's a villain behind the villain. There's a bigger fish. Evil Within 2 does not play that well. And it becomes frustrating.
We'll get into
get
it.
there. We'll get there. But the short version is you basically have to go into another STEM world that is now looks like a weird little utopia. You find out it is this whole Union City that somehow these people, Mobius, are building essentially a virtual world to put people into it. Because
kind of like Mark Zuckerberg right now.
Yeah, they're basically, it's not the machines taking over the world in the Matrix, but it is basically them manipulating people by putting them into a virtual world to live out their lives for whatever reason because it's control and these people have weird fetishes about control. Again, this is where I say Mobius needs better explanation for who they are. And that's one of the
Yeah.
first criticisms I will say right away is Evil Within 2 does rely a lot more on exposition at the beginning. They don't give Mobius a lot of exposition. Like, I still don't really get what Mobius's whole deal is. Whereas if you ask me what's Umbrella's deal in Resident Evil, I could tell you. You know, bottom line, I could tell you. Yeah, there's some psychopaths who think the whole world needs to burn because their philosophy is this, that. Yeah, but at the bottom line, I get this organization. You know, what they're about. And I think that, to me, is one of the underlying weaknesses, is that I'm not really sure what Mobius's end goal is by creating this weird Matrix world.
Yeah, like unless it's a case of like trying to shove all the humans into a massive virtual world and then just like own them.
Yeah.
Even then, that doesn't make any sense because okay, you gotta feed the humans, you gotta clean the humans,
Yeah, you
you
still
gotta
have to
pay for the funding to get electricity and stuff.
yeah.
Not every human's gonna agree to this. Like, there's a lot of things that go wrong the moment that you start thinking about it beyond. Well, it's a cool idea on paper.
Yeah, whereas I would say that, and this is where I have to also do some cross comparison with Resident Evil, because, like, you know, somebody, you know, some people would say, well, isn't that like Wesker's deal? Like, especially Resident Evil 5, when he's talking about being superior and godlike over the world and that he's going to burn the world down. And it's like, okay, yeah, but his obsession is with superiority and he wants to get rid of everything inferior. And for him, that is most of the world to him. And they make it a core point in Resident Evil 5 that, you know, only this teeny ass percentage of people can survive the progenitor virus. So he truly feels he is superior to people and can make these decisions because the world's a fucked up place and he's clearly evolved and needs to fix the unfucking. And the way he's going to fix it is by burning everything down. That makes sense to me. Mobius, I think, to some extent, is a little bit that. They do definitely imply at a few points in the game or say that this is about creating a better world because the world is fucked up. And so they're using this virtual, essentially this mind world to create a perfect world. You know, they also are screening people. But it still, to me, isn't enough of an explanation for why it's not just that they're creating this virtual world, but that they are manipulating people to bring in there, because they do make it very clear in the game that the way Mobius is selecting people is by using a facade of this sort of organization that's more cult-like in the outside, and they're using that facade to screen people. It's like they basically create their own Scientology on the outside to lure people in, and so that they can put them into this world. But in this virtual world, they are overriding people's memories and personalities. So people in this virtual world do not know that they are in this virtual world. And so to me, that's where the logic of, well, they're doing it to create a better world kind of loses its footing, because it's like, well, you know, I get Mr. I want to burn the world better than I get Mobius. It's like they're taking it's like they're over engineering a solution.
Yeah.
It's an over engineered solution.
Because they're a company, Mobius is.
Mm-hmm.
And so they've got this machine and it does a certain thing. And like, okay, then what? Is my question that I posed to them. And if their answer is, well, we shove humans into it and we abduct them, it's like, okay, so you're basically a bunch of overpriced kidnappers.
Yeah. Human trafficking?
Yeah. And at some point, because some cops already know about this and whatnot, then it becomes a case of investigating them. And guess what happens? Because people don't like having their countrymen kidnapped in mass, or at all, I would hope.
Yeah.
This company is going to go under, and the country in question will seize their assets and blah blah blah. Like, it doesn't end well for them.
Yeah. That's if they present it as a company, though. I would say the second game seems to me argues more that they're an organization, in a less overt way than like Umbrella as presenting as a pharmaceutical company with a whole underground to it. With Mobius, I get the impression that it's more like deep mob almost. Like, not the mob, but it's like deep criminal organization almost.
So here's my solution.
Okay, I want to hear. I want to hear.
You've seen the movie Total Recall,
I have
right?
not actually.
Okay. See the Arnold Schwarzenegger Total Recall.
Okay.
So basically, what happens is it's this company, and what this company does is they sell memories. And in those memories, you can be whoever you want. You can do whatever you want. They have whole packages of you running through basically stories,
Hmm.
right? Like Arnie, he goes and he buys a package where he's a spy who's going to Mars to rescue people. And like, so what they do is they put him in the machine and then they plug it in, and then like something goes wrong, and you're not sure what exactly went wrong, but now he's definitely sure that he is a spy, and he's been reawakened to what's been going on, and now he has to get to Mars to go rescue people, and like his wife's involved, this lady that he knows who's like part of the team is involved. Like it's bananas. and and it's one of my favorite Arnie. Look, y'all, I'm a huge Arnie fan. I
No
have
shit.
I have a ton of his movies on DVD, and I mean a ton of them.
Yeah.
And it it's so great. Like he is so much fun. He gets comedy, and I know I'm on a side tangent. You just give me one moment.
Go
He
for it.
gets comedy. He's good at comedy. He delivers his lines so well. He knows the beats, timing, everything. He knows action. He's such a great package, especially for the 80s and 90s era. You go to those times and you watch just about anything that he's been in, it's a good time.
What's
Even
the
if
one
it's a
that you
dumb time, it's a good time.
What's the one that you made me watch with Jamie Lee Curtis? I cannot remember its title.
True Lies.
There we go. And that's a good team up too, having those two on screen together.
That's one of his best movies, I think. Um,
Honestly, it is like the pair you least expect, and yet Curtis and Schwarzenegger together on screen is brilliant.
they have great charisma together, great chemistry.
Yes.
And him and Tom Arnold have great chemistry too.
Hmm.
But yeah, those two phenomenal. Anyway, right back to Evil Within 2. I had to get that out of my
Yeah.
system.
No, that's fair. That's fair. And I think it goes into, again, on its surface, if you're not digging deep, it works. But I think after we've established here, knowing what we've been able to unravel about the layers of lore within Evil Within 1, including implications about Mobius that they don't give a lot of explanation to in the main game. Again, because if you don't happen to play the DLC, you don't get a lot of explanation at Mobius. But for the main game, it works that you don't have a lot of explanation. It's okay to just be like, there is some secret other power at play here. They're the ones who brought Kidman in. It goes into an element of there's a bigger conspiracy that Sebastian doesn't know. He's just trying to get the fuck out of it. And that works. That works. Deal with the problem that's in front of you. 2 tries to elaborate on that conspiracy, but I would say they fell into a problem where they didn't think it through fully enough. They thought through some of it, but they didn't really sit down. Like, I would say if you're gonna have something like an organization that is somehow secretly behind all this other stuff and has this conspiracy and is as nefarious as Mobius is, I don't need to know that you've put tons of thought into them, but it should not be as easy as I feel like it is to poke holes in Mobius, which I think is that's where things sort of start to fall apart, is when you start to poke holes. And I mean, let's be real, Dave. You and I both are writers too. We both love world developing and world building in our own right. We've pinged ideas off of each other, and we're both the type to sit there and, to some people would probably say, over-examine elements because we want to pick it apart. I mean, years ago, I had this idea for a story, and I never wrote down the story, but I wrote 7 pages of just me starting to think through the what if premise, because the what if was like, what if this one thing happened? Like, I think it was like, what if human beings could hibernate? And I started coming up with a whole premise to it, but it was based off me sitting there going through logical questions of what would this look like? What would this look like? That would this look like? What would people's behaviors be? And to me, that's an element where it's like, where there has to be said that founding, even if your game is fiction, even if your story is fiction, even if it's fictional characters in a fictional world with fictional organizations in a fictional city, when you can ground that element just enough in reality that it makes sense, your viewers accept it better. And that's what works in the first game, is they ground just enough of the lore in reality while not saying everything, but it makes, okay, I don't know what Mobius is. I don't know what this evil organization is, but I can accept it because they've grounded enough of this in things that you can relate to in real life. Like a city with a mental hospital, just very simple things grounded. But you get to the second one and it's like, how the fuck does this work? you know? And to be honest, Mobius's whole cover to me just sounds like Scientology, which I also think is just a hack thing. I mean, I live like 3 miles from the Scientology Center. That place looks like it's
It's bizarre.
oh my
It's
gosh.
insane.
You drive past the building. By the way, guys, this is going to be my side tangent. If you have been to Los Angeles and you have seen the Scientology building, like the big one that's off of Sunset, you know what I'm talking about. It is the most ugly fucking building ever. Dare I said it. It's ugly. It is the worst shade of blue, and it's the whole ass building. It's hilariously right across the street from like literally a big ass Kaiser hospital, because it's in the middle of like this giant Kaiser Permanente campus of buildings in the city. But it's this big ass building, windows all over it. And if you drive around, so go to the next cross, like, the street parallel to Sunset on the back side of the building, you actually are right up against the building. So like if you're driving down Sunset, you see like there's the lawn, whatever driveway, like the building has that big imposing, like you're far away from it. But if you go on the cross street on the other side of the building, you're literally right next to the fucking building because that's a much smaller street. And I have looked up at it, and it is just all these identical windows going like ground all the way up to the roof. Every single window is shaded with like what looks like a weird white plastic curtain. I'm not even
Well,
kidding. Like this was like last week I drove past it and it was just like, and I always have to take a peek because I drive by and it's kind of like, am I going to see a window that I can actually kind of see inside? But no, every fucking window looks identical and every fucking window is covered. And again, it's not like, oh, it's this like clinical like office curtain where it's just down. It doesn't look like fabric. It literally looks like white plastic that's been like taped over a window.
all those covers are there to protect them from the psychologists and psychiatrists. We
Right?
all know that
Yeah. But so I
plastic coverings will drive those people away.
But yeah, so that whole aside being that Mobius, to me, the game, I don't know if they were thinking of Scientology when they went for Mobius's cover, but it feels like in the game, like it's like their cover was a Scientology cult to draw people in. I don't know why, but it kind of hurts my brain with that. But that all aside, Evil Within 2 again, it's still a fun game to play, but it is a very, very different game from Evil Within 1. And not even just in playstyle, though in playstyle, there's definitely some major difference. Not the least of which being that this game clearly Bethesda was involved in. Evil Within 2 makes it very obvious, kind of right from the get-go, that Bethesda's been involved in production. You know, and that even just being the fact that one of the Easter eggs in the game is occasionally you find these things that you go, this figure's kind of cool and familiar looking. I'm going to put it in my safe room. The figures are all figures of other Bethesda game things. That I'm not going to take any issue with that because every game studio has the right to throw in Easter eggs from their other games, you know, in a just fun way. Like you find Pipman from Fallout. It's like, okay, whatever, but it's one of the things they do very differently, and they do not, I'd say they don't execute it well, is the linear versus open world in this, because Evil Within 2 definitely leans into trying to create more sandbox element by having it be much more open universe when you first get to this Union City place. You can explore, you can do things in a different order, you can sneak around, you can fight things, you can skip past things and not elaborate on things. There are actual side quests. But once you leave that area, it becomes very straightforward
Hmm.
and direct. And kind of what we were talking about earlier with Evil Within 1 is I get what they were trying to do, and I do actually really like spending a lot of time just going around Union City in Evil Within
Yeah.
2. That is fun to me. I actually do kind of like just going around it. But once you leave that part of the city, it's like no going back.
Yeah.
You know. There is no going back. Oops, I forgot. Nope. Nope, that's it. We're no longer in this area. And now everything is going to be very direct, very straightforward. There's going to be minimal wandering.
I I like the idea of it being
Yeah.
open
Yeah.
and being somewhere that you can explore.
Yeah, no. And I
My
agree. I think it's a fun element.
Yeah. I have the problem of uh the switch.
Yeah. It's just too abrupt for me. It's
It's
again,
two
I
different games.
yeah, and I can respect that they tried it, that they did
Mhm.
try it, and I think they were onto something, but it becomes a bit of a did you overcommit or did they try something, they liked it, but they didn't know how to do it anywhere else in the game. So rather than get rid of it and restructure the first half of the game, because it's really the first half of the game, rather than restructure the first half of the game so that at least there was some consistent style, they just went, no, we're going to keep that and then do the other part there. When it just, it bothers me. It's, now they think about it, it almost feels like they left that part in because the exploring that is probably the slowest part of the game, but it's because it's the most non-linear because you can explore at your own pace. And
Yeah.
well, going into the villains in it, it's how they lengthen Valentini's portion of the game. Which is
Yeah.
unfortunate because the bits and pieces where you get more about him could have been expanded on in a way that didn't rely on how long the player spends in the sandbox before they go on to the next part of the plot. Because once you go back into the plot, you get through Valentini's part so fast. And that is going to go into like one of our big things that we're going to touch on, of course, is the villains and Valentini. Because I know you have some opinions, Dave,
I have
of
a lot of
the
opinions.
unique deviation. And of course, going into Evil Within 2, you go, what kind of villain are we going to get? We've had Ruvik. Who are we going to get next? And at least from the start, you start to realize, oh, this guy Valentini, interesting. He's not like Ruvik. And I'll let you take it from here on, Valentini, because
Yeah. So Valentini, what a what a genius villain.
yes.
What a delightful villain. Um to clarify what this villain is, Valentini is a very fancy man who is a photographer and artist. And the way that he does art is he poses people in the midst of their death throes and photographs them and holds that moment in time and space as sacred. Um, he dresses fancy, he looks fancy, he is all style, all panache, all sparkle, like you name it, that is him. From
Mhm.
the voice all the way to the movement.
I mean, complete with
He
Italian accent, guys.
he is probably my favorite villain of the franchise. Um, and the way that he's set up is it feels like he's the next Ruvik, as in like he's the next like main guy.
Hmm.
And you see him in because he's also got a thin frame. He's got like short hair like Ruvik has. He's not pale like Ruvik, and his hair's not white like Ruvik. His hair is like a burgundy purplish color, if I remember correctly.
I just knew it was
And
short. I always thought it was black.
he's got it might be black, but I remember it as like purplish burgundy.
Fair.
Um, He's got like a slightly darker shade of skin, but he's obviously like Italian, right?
Hmm.
Um,
He's got a good
and
olive complexion.
yeah, and the flourishes that he has in every movement and in every thing that he says, it's very clear that he's got a specific type of personality. He's got a backstory. He feels very three dimensional in a lot of ways, even though we don't know much about him. And I figured when you were playing through it and I was watching Liz,
Hmm.
that we would learn a lot about this guy, kind of like what we
Yeah.
did with Ruvik,
And you start
you
to,
know.
like, when he finds the, you start to, but you start to, like, right after, which is the weird part.
And and so what winds up happening is you get to the final confrontation with him, and you're like, man, this game is quick because when you get to there, like it feels like, oh, it's the final boss. Like we're facing off against Valentini.
Yeah, the world gets really
This is it.
distorted, and you find yourself going, wait, how long have I been playing this game?
Yeah, it feels like the game is practically over already.
Yeah.
And then you beat him and you kill him, and then it goes into another part. And when I saw that, I was like, what the fuck? What are you doing
Yeah.
here?
Yeah.
And and then what happens is it basically transitions into more of a for Evil Within a classic more linear style of movement.
Hmm.
Um and with that, you get introduced to new villains. And I say villains plural, even though one you've already been introduced to,
Hmm.
the Cum Beast. Uh,
I knew that was coming. We will elaborate. Don't
it
worry.
was
You will find
uh,
out.
all over the place. Um, and then you get introduced to two other villains. Um, and it's like, okay, these three are supposedly working together and yet not.
Yeah. I think his
It's
father
how it kind of
Gregory.
feels.
I think his
Yeah.
father Gregory, Cum Beast. We will elaborate on who Cum
And
Beast actually is. Don't worry.
and who's the third one? Because there is a third one.
Father Gregory. Well,
Because
it's
they
the
form
main.
kind of a
Well, the main thing is that it's Valentini. You meet Cumbeast, but you don't get a lot of detail on it because then they go
yeah.
into really introducing Father Gregory, and then Father Gregory implies Cumbeast, and then Mobius. Oh, the Mobius boss guy.
Oh,
Who,
okay, yeah,
but he they don't overtly introduce him as much as you see him in the background
yeah,
in a lot. Like
okay,
anytime the game cuts to Kidman's side of the story, there's basically implication of this guy because I think you actually meet him at the very beginning of the game because he
yeah,
talks to Sebastian briefly, but there's not a lot of. He doesn't become more prominent in his role until the very end, and even then, it's really only enough to. Again, there's no. I don't understand that guy's role. It's again goes back to Mobius, there being too many holes in what Mobius is as an organization because the guy acts. It seems like they're trying to paint like their own version of like an Albert Wesker or a Spencer, for Umbrella, like an overarching boss man, except he plays more as like a monarch, like literally plays like a monarch and also like a stereotype.
yeah,
Yeah, he like that guy really is just a walking stereotype villain. Like, give him a cat sitting on his lap to stroke, and he's going to be a Bond villain.
yeah. So like, I don't know what to do with that other than to be disappointed.
Yeah.
Um, because okay, if you wanted to use these other villains, make number three is what I would say.
Yeah.
Um, because they could be very useful in the Evil Within universe. They could very well fit in the Evil Within universe.
Hmm.
Um, the again, the problem that I have with it is they basically just run over Valentini like he's an armadillo in Texas. Just run the poor bastard over. And it's a shame because he's again one of the best villains, if not the best villain they've had in this series or
Yeah.
duology.
And because his
Um,
villainy or whatever, he is. at core very different from Ruvik. Like if Ruvik is somebody who his villainy is shaped a lot by an external experience and then a combination of personality, but again, with strong shaping of an external experience, they very quickly established that no, Valentini's whole brain is built different. Like his crazy isn't specifically shaped by an external. Like I almost feel like Valentini literally reads as this guy has like whatever in the brain gives you a moral ethical code, this guy doesn't have it.
Yeah.
You know, he masks in society, which is how he's gotten by, but he literally like it's like the frontal lobe or something. Like he has no frontal lobe. He does not care. He does not see people the way anybody else sees people. Because even Ruvik somewhat reads as having some perception of person. You know, on some level, Ruvik has cared, even if but it's almost more like for Ruvik, it's like a child who was not well, who didn't develop correctly,
Mm.
you know. Whereas Valentini, it's like, no, that was the guy who was like pulling wings off of butterflies as a kid.
Yeah.
Like he reads like a sociopath.
Yeah. But yeah, I think if they wanted to do that, they should have had a third one.
Yeah.
And another thing, since we mentioned Valentini's presence, after his presence is gone, the rest of them feel like they're dull as bricks.
His is so specific, especially because, and they so uniquely lean into him being thinking of himself as an artist and as a photographer. And as such, camera lenses and cameras become such a specific visual throughout the game. And it's so unique. Like, I can't think of many other The only other time I think of a camera being really uniquely used in framing horror is that one scene in Saw. And I
Mhm.
think most people who've seen it know which one I'm talking about because you keep thinking something is going to jump out and get the person while they're going through that apartment and taking the pictures, and it never happens. It
Yeah.
never happens, but it is a well played scene using a camera as a very specific device to drive the tension because it's the camera flash. And,
Yeah.
you know, with Valentini, you get these things where you look in the sky and it's not just, oh, an eye in the sky, it's a camera lens. It's very much about freezing moments in time. And we definitely get the impression they explain in the game that on some level, he was never supposed to end up in STEM. Like it's this whole thing of their whole whatever screening things they're using, he's masked enough that he's passed all the screening tests. So,
Mm.
they basically ended up with a mind that's too self-aware within STEM for them to control. And it goes into the whole thing of they use Lily as like the blank slate that can support STEM but doesn't control STEM the way Ruvik did, whereas Valentini, it's like you kind of have a similar idea where it's supposed to be he doesn't have to he has a unique different advantage because his mind isn't supporting STEM, but he has that same self-awareness that like you got with Ruvik where he can manipulate the world in his
Yeah.
favor because they basically used a mind that can essentially work more as a blank slate, you know. And that goes into the whole again, what is going on here, like without kicking more holes in it than we already have, because we could. But he's so unique. He's characterized, and frankly, the voice actor does a damn good job. And a lot of times I feel like characters like him can be voiced as stereotypes,
Yeah.
and they manage to not play him. He's just enough for you to get the flair of the drama, but it is not enough to turn him into a stereotype. It's like, no, this is a guy who instinctively behaves in a flamboyant, dramatic fashion. You know, he's a narcissist.
Yep.
You know,
But it's very delightful.
it is. It is. The whole theater scene to me that is actually really one of the better scenes in that game. The theater scene when Sebastian confronts him and he has all the minds there, because that to me is a very, very well crafted scene for presenting just how dangerous Valentini is
Yeah.
and how little regard he has for human life. So,
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there's Cum Beast.
Yep.
Cum Beast. Oh, we're gonna get into so much more with that. We will. I promise y'all. But yeah, no. Like in terms of gameplay and style, though, again, I like what two was trying to get at with exploring more sandbox moments, and I actually think that is a good done. That is a fun part of the game, especially when you add the element that you can cross between the I forget what they call it, but it's basically their sort of underworld access tunnels that are all the Mobius areas versus Union City. So I liked it. It sort of starts to fall apart, especially once you get past Valentini and things become much more linear. Like, I'm going to be honest here, I would have really liked it if, especially because those tunnels allow you to go kind of, they're the one of the few things that helps preserve a slightly open world element to it because you can go in and out of them. I would have
Yeah.
liked that even after beating Valentini, all they would have had to have done is allow you with the tunnels to be able to go back to that part of Union City.
Mhm.
And that would have made such a difference. Like if Resident Evil 2 remake, that you leave the police station finally, um, when Leon leaves it with Ada, you think that's it, you're not going back. But you also think, wait, but there's some stuff I didn't get here. Well, it's because, like, the key that opens the right door for you to get into the place you need to be, you don't find until you're in the sewers. But hey, if you go collect that part and backtrack to this point, you can go all the way back into Raccoon City Police Station and get all this other stuff. And to me, that is a brilliant element that it's like you can get this far into the game, but you can still backtrack to this area. It's a good way of using an open world style while still directing you as a player with a here's a direction to go. But hey, if you're one of those people, we do have a way for you to go back here and do this, and you do get rewards for doing it.
Yeah.
And I think it's the thing that makes me sad is that all they really would have had to have done is just created a little bit more of a network that you could go back to these places that you had already been to, that these places don't just disappear
Yeah.
completely. Because that to me is like, that's a loss. If you're going to be
Yeah.
sandbox, if you're going to create a part of the game that is sandbox, and I would say in a comparison, Resident Evil 2 Remake does effectively what Evil Within 2 tried to do and failed to do. Because really, the RCPD is their sandbox area. Because if you're
Yeah.
speedrunning that game, you skip a shit ton. Like, I've tried speedrunning that game, and when you're speedrunning RE2, you skip so much of the police station. There's so much that you do not have to do. It is non-essential to just getting from point A to point B.
Yeah.
But it is sandbox. You do have a lot of I can go here, I can go there. It's very puzzle. It's very solve it, figure out the strategy, this and that, and go through here, go to this place, go to that place. But you can come back to it later. You don't have to. And the second half of the game is much more direct in this is the direction you're going to go with a little with some open stuff, especially in the sewers where you're exploring, but it is still more at that point. It's a little bit more directed. There's more of a specific you need to get to here, not you're trying to figure out where to get to.
Mhm.
Whereas I would say that's the problem is that Evil Within 2 tries to do that, but then there's a point where they just say, okay, now the door's closed forever on that. You're not going back to that. You're not going to have any way to go back to that. You're only going back to
Yeah.
that when we tell you you can. And to me, that just, it doesn't work.
No. No, not at all.
It leaves you feeling unfulfilled because then you feel like you made bad decisions, which I know some games that works, but it doesn't work for Evil Within 2. I
Yeah.
also don't like the way they approach dialogue in it. Like, they have the cutscenes, but they definitely take what I would say is a dialogue style in that you can expand on the dialogue with characters and pick responses.
And those things are also in open world style games.
But it
So,
just
and that's
doesn't.
another reason why I point to, like, it feels like they're two different games,
Yeah.
right? Where
Well,
you have the one where it starts in the open world and you have dialogue with characters and stuff like that. And you go out on like mini missions and stuff, like all these classic open world kind of choices with development. And then suddenly we throw that out the window. Fuck that. It's over. and now we're just plow forward, get to the end of the where the bad guy is, and beat the final boss, and yada yada.
Yeah, it's almost that they leaned too far into open world. Like if they had just pulled back a little bit on open world, because again, and I will cite Resident Evil 2 Remake as being an example of taking some of the open world approach, but still retaining the linear element without feeling like two different games, because it doesn't. Like when you talk to Marvin, you don't get to pick the responses. That is a linear, that is a core part of the game. Your
Yeah.
interactions. Now, could you skip talking to Marvin? Yeah, there are some points in the game that don't automatically cutscene to Marvin, that only cutscene if you approach Marvin. And you could skip those. You could skip those points entirely. It isn't going to change the outcome of the game. It just means you've skipped a point that would have elaborated on the plot. But it's because at the end of the day, this is the story we're trying to tell with these characters. These are the characters. It's an element of saying you have control enough to the character to decide where they go, but we're just going to still tell you who these characters are. And I think when you start getting into dialogue choices, you start getting into making the character a little bit too ambiguous and generic, because you're trying to take away some of the specificity of the character by giving the player more control over how the character interacts with the people around them.
Yeah.
And that to me, and also because quite frankly, if you're going to put dialogue options within a game, then they need to have an impact for why that they're there. Like even in Star Wars The Old Republic online, the online or whatever it is, whatever the online one is, I play it sometimes. That one, you get a lot of cutscenes, story areas where you can choose dialogue, but there the dialogue plays into whether your character basically over time gravitates more towards the light side or the dark side. So you could end up taking a character that you started out as a Jedi character and totally turning him into a dark sider just through dialogue choices, because the dialogue choices contribute to this meter of whether essentially you're a good guy or a bad guy. And I think that's something where dialogue choices, it's a mechanic that has to make sense. Why is it here? But it doesn't serve a purpose. The only purpose it serves in Evil Within 2 is if you want a little more information about something. And to me, I'm like, well, isn't that what finding files are for? Like most games I've played, like again, pretty much every Resident Evil, if you want a little more information, then just read the random file that you found here. Otherwise, move on with your life. And if you want to find that information out again, you can go back into your files and read the file again.
And this is where I think the first one really sticks out as the better one.
Mm-hmm.
Is things like that. You know, things like we know what kind of game this is. It's very clear what this game is supposed to be. It doesn't feel like two different games. It doesn't feel like there's two different sets of like thought processes and mechanics and stuff that you need to operate in this one game as a whole, because it is what it is.
Yeah.
Right? Like you're saying, you have getting backstory and background in the game is simple in one. And that doesn't mean easy or dumb. Simple can be like complex.
You can use a simple mechanic to supply complex information.
Yeah. You know, it had very simple things. And for all that I complained about the stealth in the first one and how the stealth in the second one works a little better, at least in the first part with the open world section, right? That doesn't mean that I think that everything with 2 is better than 1. I think there's a couple of things that are better, but for the most part, I think 1 did the superior job in that, yes, it's linear, but it maintains that. It doesn't change it up in the middle and be like, oh, now we have this open world.
Yeah.
We have like, for lack of a better term, I would call them pseudo open worlds, in that you have the hotels and stuff that you encounter that are like little mazes that you can wander through, but they still lead to an end point of linearness.
There's still only one solution to get out of the maze.
Yeah. You don't have side quests. At most, you have collectibles. which I mean, some people would call that a side quest, but not really, right?
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, well, they're collectibles. I don't know if you get anything for completing the Crimson City map, but
right.
it's the statues with the keys, but that
Yep.
is used as more of a way to unlock additional enhancement, because you
Yeah.
might get extra ammo. So you're incentivized because the keys might get you things you need. And they're always
Yeah.
going to get you something that's beneficial. I would say, the truest side quest in that it's not essential at all is finding the map fragments. Um, but again, that's the side quest because, like you said, it's a side quest really, especially because one of the fragments for the map, as well as one of the keys, if I'm not mistaken, or at least it's one of the keys. It may be one of the keys or it's definitely a key, but one of them you can only get in one spot in the game, and you only can get to that spot in the game if you actually kill Laura in your final encounter with her. And that's where it's an element of, frankly, of adding replay value to the game because she is so hard to kill, even when you have maxed out things and you are stacked. But it's an element where they definitely put something in that they distinctly said, this area is hard to get to, but you can reap rewards if you get to it. But let's
Yeah.
be real, you're going to have to do this on your second or third run because you are going to have brain juiced, like roided Sebastian up to like the maximum. You need the big guns to do this,
Yeah.
you know.
Preparation is key.
Yeah, but it's a way of basically, to them, and in some ways, it's really that it's not a side quest as much as they basically created an element that for the obsessive, we must do everything in the game possible. This is your completionist run point,
Yeah.
because
Um,
you cannot, I would think I'd be curious if anybody's ever beat Laura and that part on a single first run because it is
I'm
hard.
it's
It's
probably technically possible,
but it's
but
very
good
difficult.
luck.
I mean, when I watched a run of somebody who very much knew what they were doing to beat Laura, they had very much maxed out a lot of stuff. So they deliberately make that fight very difficult. It's not impossible, but they also tempt you by making an out from the fight that doesn't require killing her.
Yeah.
Which is what
And
tends to win out with people is you're getting frustrated. Well, I'm just going to do the escape route instead.
that's another thing that I think is missing into is there's no like at least as far as I know, there's no like secret boss for lack of a better term or like any kind of like super secret special hard kind of thing that if you do it, you get this like massive reward, right?
Yeah, there's a little
Um
bit of that weird phantom that seems a lot like Laura. It's in the parts when Sebastian finds himself back in Beacon
hmm,
and with that weird phantom woman,
yeah.
Dementor lady, basically, because if you've watched the Harry Potter films, she pretty much sucks your soul out like a Dementor. Um, but it's, I have mixed feelings on it. I don't mind that they're trying to explore the that they're continuing the theme of exploring trauma. Because quite frankly, I appreciate that this game doesn't brush past the fact that what I do appreciate that too is that they don't avoid the fact that the experience of evil within one that Sebastian goes through for any normal human being would be immensely traumatic. And and the game goes into further that he's basically gaslit by his bosses and superiors. And then you find out later that it's because Mobius is trying to cover up. So they're manipulating him to discredit him so that he basically stops trying to put anything out in the open and threaten their own existence. So,
Yeah.
but it's and I don't mind that. I think it's nice to see a game say, hey, we're going to look at what this character went through before through the lens of them now trying to process that while they're being forced back into a place, back in basically to the place where they experienced that trauma in the first place. But they're being forced into here. So that in and of itself is brilliant. I mean, it's the joke that you've heard me make when I play Resident Evil games of how traumatized are these characters because they're so fucking traumatized or should be
Yeah.
so fucking traumatized. And Resident Evil doesn't spend a lot of time on that. I think it's
Yeah.
left unspoken in a lot of the games that these characters are all effectively highly traumatized, and I don't mind it, but it's nice to see a game not shy away from it because it's a subject people don't like to talk about,
I don't think
necessarily.
it's I don't think it's the job of Resident Evil.
No,
It,
I don't
it,
think so
it,
either.
to clarify for the audience, what I mean is Resident Evil from the very beginning was more about, well, I guess even with the first one, to a degree, but more with the later ones, it's more about the action, and with the earlier ones and later ones when they bring it back, the
Yeah.
puzzle solving,
Yeah.
right? It's more about like there's some messed up stuff happening here, but we've got guns, we've got knives, we've got our brains, we got some puzzle solving action. We can do this. Let's go.
Yeah.
It's not it's not ever been about like exploring uh any kind of like
Personal
theme
psyche.
like trauma or something like that. It's always been
They've played
something different.
I'd say they've played on it a little bit and hinted at it, especially with the remakes, because the remakes take on what I would say is a bit more of a reality grounded approach to some of these characters. And that's just that part of that can be just chalked up to the fact that the dialogue is better
Yeah.
and less campy. And in that regard, they've pushed it a little bit more, I think, because as the remakes are happening and people are getting more into wanting slightly more realistic portrayals, they're also recognizing that they have to acknowledge more openly that the characters aren't going to be unchanged because of what they experienced. And I expect that. That's the remakes. But again, yeah, you're right. Resident Evil isn't telling that story. Ultimately, their story has more to do with, you know, BOWs, these monstrous creatures that are becoming a part of society that this underground, the underground criminals are using, and that there's conspiracy. Sorry, there's a gnat flying through my apartment. It's driving me nuts. So it's a whole different storyline, whereas Evil Within definitely is more about internally exploring these characters because the world that they're going into isn't the real world and you have to still go live in it. This is a mindscape. And so you've got villains who are utilizing this mindscape to subjugate people, to taunt them, to traumatize them, to control them. And so it is characters. Part of it's the environment of one is supposed to be taking place in the normal world where one is taking place in the mind. So the villains are using the mind against you. So it's a very internalized element. You know, I bring it up with the comparison to Resident Evil because of how closely related in kind of production at the beginning, especially with Shinji Mikami's involvement in the first game, there is a lot of similarity. So, but yeah, it's a different type of storytelling. And I like that with two that they keep that going. Do I think the Beacon Mental Hospital parts could have been done better? Yes. Partly because I don't really understand that woman. There's a lot that's sort of like they kind of pulled it out of the air and they just didn't put a lot of time into explaining it.
Yeah.
And that hurts my soul. That hurts my soul because it's a little bit more. It's like they weren't as grounded in exploring some of this stuff.
Well, then my question would be, do you think that the game development itself was aimed at the idea of expanding and exploring this universe and these characters? Or do you think it might have been something like the studio going, just crank something out with this IP and make it happen, and then things kept getting borked. Like I kept bringing up the whole like feels like one game now it's a different game kind of deal, and
Yeah.
we've got we have these more exploratory things regarding trauma in the first one, but here in the second one it feels kind of like it's everywhere is
Yeah.
what I will say. It feels like it's everywhere,
And I
and
think,
I'm wondering if it is a studio interference thing, as in like publishers interfering, or if it's a case of like just general monetary things, or if it was like development having one idea and then they changed to another, but then crunch time and blah blah blah, or what
yeah.
it could be.
I think, I mean, without knowing a lot of what went into development of the first game versus development of the second game, other than
Yeah.
knowing that Shinji Mikami was not involved. And I do think that's an important element because he started Tango Gameworks. That was his
Yeah.
company. So I do think that is an important element, especially because in Evil Within 2, it becomes much more obvious that this is a Bethesda game. Just by some of the parallels between gameplay mechanics and other Bethesda games, as well as the open world sandbox era, which we know Bethesda, with the Fallout games and a few other things, is very known for their sandbox stuff. So there are some elements that are very distinctly Bethesda in the second game, whereas in the first game, the only real hint of Bethesda's involvement is DC Metro, and that's in the DLC. And that really only comes if you, one, recognize that they are using the interior of the Washington, D.C. metro as a location model. And two, are aware that Bethesda GameWorks started in Bethesda, Maryland, which is right outside of DC and is part of the DC metro area. Why do I know this? Because I grew up in Northern Virginia and I went to a church that was in Bethesda, Maryland. And I grew up around that area. So I know it because it's local to me, but it's a very insider. You have to know this about Bethesda to recognize that that's their little hint in game. And they still only put that in the DLC. You don't ever see that Mobius interior in the main game at all because that part is only relevant to Kidman's story, which you only explore in depth in the DLC of the first game. So
Right.
I think there is definitely something to be said that Bethesda appears to have been more strongly involved in the development of Evil Within 2. And I don't know a lot about the development. I do know there was a different director with this one. I believe it was an American. I'm not sure entirely. I think his name was Chris something, if I'm not mistaken. Again, I don't know if it was that there were other people overwriting or if it was just this was the style and maybe it just wasn't as thought out, without knowing a lot of the details. It's hard to do anything more than speculate, but I will say that the second game does appear to have a little bit more of a committee hand on it, where not everything, it has more the appearance of who decided this, a committee, because it's not overly consistent with one message, one intent, one storyline. It's a lot of things. It's, I mean, the villains alone, Now, it's not to say that any of these decisions aren't something that could have been made by a singular person. They're just more characteristic of what I would say is something that had more committee involvement, where you had maybe this person representing this department, this person representing this one, this guy representing the studio who says, this is the decision we need to make, and we're a AAA game studio. It's a
And I'll
very
add in, I don't think they understood the assignment.
No, I don't think, and it saddens me because Evil Within 2 has a lot of potential in it. Um, Now I will say there are still some areas where I just sort of facepalm at how they don't hit. One of them being in basic design. Now the sound design is still there. I will still give Evil Within 2 sound design credit. Even Cum Beast has interesting sound design because that weird Cum Beast, like grudge ghost sound, that is good. That is well played. But visual design, there is one particular thing that to me is bothersome. And maybe it's a nitpick to other people, but this is the part of me that the last time I was involved on a film production, I ended up this was a tiny indie film production. I was brought in as hair and makeup because we were a crew of like 8 people, we all wore many hats. And myself and one other young woman, after she had to leave early from the production because she could only be in the area for a little while, we basically co-script supervisor. So, and for anybody who's not familiar with film industry, script supervisors also can be like continuity people. Like that's part of your job, is examining continuity and making sure it remains consistent. So you're the person who says, wait, hold on, the hair was on the left, not the right, or hey, we have to make sure so-and-so has this bruise or this marking on their arm in this spot when they come in because this happened in the scene before. This was coworker and I were basically doing that because we were crazy nitpicky people who noticed this shit.
Yeah.
So it bothers me is that Evil Within 2 Sebastian looks and reads as younger than Evil Within 1 Sebastian. And I'm sure some will say that, well, it's, we're getting more of him being fatherly. We're getting more of he's invested in this in a different way because it's his daughter Lily who hasn't seen. We're not going to go into the fact that they aren't really clear on how old Lily is when she gets kidnapped, because by this point I'm like, if she was this old, then she should be this old, and that does not line up with how old she actually is. Okay, guys, let's think this through. She can't be, you're almost making her too special. Sorry, there is such a thing as making a child too special, and then it's just a cliche of this child is special. No, not here for it. But Sebastian reads young. He reads young in visual, and I'm not talking visual in the way he dresses. And again, somebody could say, well, he dyed his hair. Sebastian does not strike me as somebody who is so vain as to dye his hair and his beard to cover up the salt and pepper gray that he has started to get and
Yeah.
make it look cleaner when the guy is still a drunk and heavily traumatized and has now lost both of his partners in essentially traumatic experiences, and now has lost his job basically because it's actually being controlled by a secret nefarious organization, has basically gaslit him into quitting. Okay? This guy he should look so much worse off than he does in the second one. And the only real difference is that he actually has like a beard now. But everything reads like, and again, that's just almost as strictly an animation design, because they still try to give him gray hair. And in the game, you can actually, like, if you unlock it, you can dress him in his original Evil Within 1 outfit. And it's like, yeah, but he still looks younger than he does in Evil Within 1. When it's like, this is 3 years later. This guy should not look good. Okay, come on, guys. Come on. This is not working for me. But that, and I'll go into the voice acting in a moment, because the other thing that really kills it for me, he has way too much external, like, he thinks out loud too much. He speaks too much. The game does way too much tell and not show. The first game is brilliant to me in that Sebastian is by himself a lot, but he only really says what he needs to say. His journals are where you discover there is a more thoughtful person in this character. This is the journals that you uncover of his are where you get more of this internal voice of, you get more of, here is a man who has thoughts, feelings, experiences, anxieties, things he enjoys, dislikes, all of it. You get more of that personality through his writing, but externally, because of the trauma he's experienced, he's more closed off. He is more stoic. He does not interact heavily, and he doesn't say much. The second game, oh my gosh, his running dialogue that he's saying out loud all the time. I wanted to be like, what the fuck? You are not Sebastian. You are talking way too much. You are telling us what you're feeling. He is like talking out loud to the void. And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily in a character. What bothers me is it is incongruous with the character that we meet in the first game. It is heavily incongruous. And it also just is poor storytelling. It is relying on exposition to explain your character. And it's such a 180 from the first game, and it hurts my soul. It's like, this doesn't work. And it's all exposition that makes him seem way more emotive than the character you met in the first game. So really, first game Sebastian is like not even the same character as second game Sebastian. There's like subtle little bits. Like second game Sebastian is like everything we read in his journals now made present. And it's like, but in 3 years after that kind of trauma, I don't think he would have done that, especially since he basically got silenced. So this is a guy who's going to talk even less. And instead we get a guy who's very vocal, like all the time, about everything he's feeling. And it just doesn't work for me. It doesn't read right. It doesn't come off as the same character. Throw that in with, and I say this fully without trying to sound like I'm criticizing the voice actor, the guy they cast for his voice sounds younger. And I'm sure that guy is wonderful. I don't know what else he has done. I am not saying at all that he is a bad voice actor. He is not the actor I would have chosen, because I think the original voice actor, his name was Anson. Let me double check. I had it in front of me. Original voice actor, Anson Mount. I think Anson Mount was brilliant casting. which, by the way, if that name is familiar, yes, we are talking about the guy who has now, since Star Trek Discovery came out, has been playing Captain Christopher Pike in Star Trek Discovery and now in Strange New Worlds. So the guy has got a good gig going on for him now, and the only video game voiceover work he did was for Evil Within and for The Assignment, the DLC for Evil Within. I really wish they had been able to bring him back. I get it if he had other commitments going on and didn't want to do the second game, but to me it is a huge loss because I think it just doesn't line up, especially when it's supposed to be the same character, and it hurts my soul because he does so good at the character. And even though him being back in the role wouldn't necessarily have meant the dialogue would have been any better, they may have still done the same dialogue, I think it would have carried better because at least it would be coming from somebody we already knew was playing the character. So, and that's where my issue is with with the character, is that it's just it, and I have to, when I'm playing it, tell my brain this is a different character almost. I have to kind of let my brain think this is a different version of Evil Within Sebastian, because I cannot think of them as the same. It's too obvious. It's too obvious to me. And it's unfortunate because it's a combination of things that by themselves, any one of them couldn't be that damaging. And again, I don't hear a lot of people complain about it. So I know Evil Within 2 got really good, has generally got good reviews and good feedback on it. So I'm glad that it hits better for other people than it does for me. For me, it doesn't hit well because it's a combination of what I would say is miscasting and, poor dialogue choices. I would say the more offensive part of it being that the dialogue could have been so much better. And that to me is the real, it's unfortunate, the voice casting. But again, I am not saying that voice actor did a bad job. He did the best he could with it. And he is a decent voice actor. I can objectively say that guy does a good job voice acting. But to me, that's not Sebastian. Now, if he had voiced Sebastian in the first game, I might be saying a different thing. But it's too obvious otherwise with the change to dialogue. It makes it too obvious that it's different. So that is an obsessive little point. And it's not just Sebastian's character. Basically, everybody's voice has changed, but that's because the only character that carried over from the first game is Kidman. And her voice actor is obviously changed with that one too, but you don't notice it so much. And she also says very little in the first game and is suddenly talking all up a storm in the second game. And again, I'm not looking at the DLC because the DLC is Kidman's story. But in the main game, she says very little. And suddenly she's talking about everything and all her feelings. So it's more of a writing choice that they depended a little bit too much on everybody saying everything.
Yeah.
And, show don't tell! Y'all are killing me! Please. And then don't tell us something and not fulfill it. Do not tell me Joseph is definitely alive and then not give me anything. I have feelings about this. I would have rathered the game be more about, wait, Joseph is alive, let's do something about this, than the whole Moira's alive and she has been lying.
Yeah.
Because, I'm sorry, Sebastian's marriage got fucked up by his wife.
Do we want to get into
Moira?
Moira?
I think we have to at this point because that's the other big thing we said we'd touch on, which is the villain.
Yeah.
And that is the other big. We touched on it a little bit with the intent to circle back to Beast, which is Beast is Moira.
Yep. It's true.
Which is basically the best way of describing that. And the best way to describe Beast is Ruvik but cum.
Yep. That's more or less what it, like, she's even got the hood and everything. Like,
yeah.
If you look at modeling of her, because you can find modeling of her, you can see like they've got the hood,
the white coat,
some drippy little bits on her face.
Yeah.
And then like the next bits of drippiness that's actually on her body is from essentially like her under her belly button.
Her modesty is covered, basically. It's like, yeah, they basically cover her nethers and that's it. And oh, wait a minute, Ruvik's walking around shirtless in a pair of pants. Except, again, his makes sense. He's literally, it's like his burned body is walking around.
Yeah, but for her, like, I mean, even what she's covered in, like from the waist down, basically looks like cum.
It does. It does.
It,
The
it
more I've heard you say it, the more I see it, and my brain's just like, yeah, it
it
is. It feels like
that's
it. If you have to run through it, it's like slogging through this stuff. Again, when
and
the
it's thick.
Cumbies truly appears, it is a fascinating and well, like I would say, take Moira out of the equation, take the more monstrous part of it. It is an interesting villain, because
Yeah,
it's very different. It's a slow moving villain that's incredibly powerful and it can slow Sebastian down. And like that first encounter when you're in the tunnels is like another, you have to sneak, otherwise you will die.
yeah.
And so there is a lot that's good about it. It's where it falls apart is that it's Moira.
Yeah.
Also, because I just don't
That's the only
understand
thing.
why it's this white slimy stuff.
Um, so I want to, because I've been kind of thinking about it. I want to point to the boss fight, the final boss fight with her.
Oh my gosh. You mean the fight that took me
So
like an hour?
yeah. So when you're fighting her, like obviously she's covered in cum
Yeah.
and stuff, but as you fight her, like things like her well, I'm just gonna go ahead and say because I don't know any other way of saying it. Like her womb opens up and starts breaking apart. Like the rest of her internals start to fall apart and stuff. And since we're talking about trauma, the only thing I could think of that would tie to that is some sort of like post traumatic birth depression and such, which a lot of women get,
Yeah, like
and a lot of
postpartum.
people get, I should say, because women and men can both give birth.
Yes.
But people who have
Anybody
uteruses,
who's given birth, given,
anybody who's given birth,
yes.
can suffer from postpartum depression and whatnot. And maybe that is part of the ties involving Moira, especially considering how defensive she is of Lily and
Yeah.
all this stuff.
Or even just an
Um,
implied push on a maternal instinct because they do seem to rely a lot on it. It's she's the mother, she's the mother. This is why she's this way, she's her mother.
yeah, but that still, to me, does not give an excuse for why she's covered in cum.
No. No.
It's a bizarre decision at best. To be the most charitable possible, it is a very bizarre decision,
Yeah.
and I
Even
don't
Father
understand it.
Gregory makes more sense. Even if it is like, wow, another cultish religious priestly type figure who's just a mad avid cult leader. He makes sense.
And he was
He
also a burn victim of some kind.
Yeah, but he makes sense. It's like,
Yeah,
okay, yeah, he carries in a bit of a more obvious stereotype, but it's a stereotype we can get because when you get the elaboration on the character, he is very charismatic. I mean, he literally, you basically read about him and go, okay, this guy's a cult leader,
yeah,
and he's leaning into the religious cult.
yeah. And that's fine. That's whatever. Um, but yeah, with Moira, I don't get it other than to have a bizarre way of portraying this woman
Yeah.
the way that they do.
It's like the only thing I can think of is that they just wanted something that was so immensely monstrous to have
But there's a
as a way to like shock the viewer when you find out that this is actually like Sebastian's wife who left him because she was convinced there's a conspiracy and you're now discovering exactly that there was a conspiracy and that she was right the whole time. But that also throws in the whole upset of it whole of Moira found out about a conspiracy, so she infiltrated Mobius and has been working as Mobius in order to be closer to Lily. And it's this whole thing, oh, but she went crazy at the end with pretend. Again, it's a thing where I'm like, if you don't pay too close of attention, you can kind of overlook it, but you start looking at it and not even like with a heavy scrutinizing eye. Like, it's not even that you have to really be in the game for cursory and probably have never played the first game to really be able to overlook a lot of those holes because otherwise it just stops making sense. Like, what kind of group, like, if Mobius is nefarious and has their hands in as much and can manipulate as much as they can, why would they even let Moira, a detective who's been investigating them, and you're sure, and I am sure they knew she was investigating them. How would they even, because like even Kidman at one point says that if you see us, you're gone already, sort of thing. Like nobody finds us without us wanting to be found. And it's like, why would they then let this woman into their organization?
Yeah.
You know, when they know she's looking like there are so many holes about it. I'm going to jump to character design too, because since we were touching on that with the whole Cumbies, the other thing that really gets me is how she's designed. I'm
Mhm.
sorry, but she, and some could probably argue that the pedestal she is on is because Sebastian still absolutely cares for her and adores her. But she is too far onto a pedestal. The Moira I was
Yeah.
presented with in the very first game to me, like you never see her, you only read about her. And to me, she reads as this maybe small, kind of spicy Caucasian woman, maybe brown hair, whatever, kind of reads as spicy, maybe unassuming, but absolutely can hold her own and can intimidate and freak everybody else out. Like, you know, and the Moira we see in the second game to me is an accountant. Like, I don't see a cop at all in there. I don't see a detective at all in there. And again, some could say, well, that's the no. No, she doesn't read correctly. They visually make her angelic looking by giving her the blonde hair, the white sweater, the earrings. And to me, it's like, okay, we are getting way too obvious with the imagery here of trying to make her seem absolutely perfect. Also, if reasonably she and Sebastian are probably supposed to be in their 30s, she looks too old. They straight
She
up,
looks too old. He
she
looks
looks,
too young.
yeah, he looks too young. She looks too old. She literally reads like she's in her, like, looks like she's in her 40s, yet the implications, especially again, going back to the first game in his journals, Sebastian starts out as a beat cop. So it's kind of like, okay, this is a guy who probably started in his 20s and at most is in his 30s now, you know, and again, it just doesn't read. If Sebastian in Evil Within 2 looks too young, but at least still looks like he's in his 30s, she looks like she's got 10 years on him. And she
Yeah.
just reads too perfectly. Even when it's not Sebastian remembering her, she reads too perfectly. Like it's almost like they go too far out of their way to really again, it's the telling instead of showing, and they're constantly overtly trying to remind you Moira's not a bad person. Whatever this world has done has fucked her up. But I'm not really sure I understand why she's so fucked up by it when you also realize that it was literally up until like shit really hit the fan that she went off the rails. So it's like,
Yeah.
so why did she suddenly go off the rails? Like, I'm really missing something here because to me, I'm seeing is somebody who's is much less stable than she has any right to be.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, so
Um,
it was a missed opportunity and poor decision making with Moira because she had potential to be an interesting element to this.
yeah.
But they got it's like it's again it goes back to what you said of two different characters, two different games going on, more than one thing. They really wanted Moira, who's actually the villain, but the villain born of, deep maternal instinct that's being manipulated, versus Moira, the smart, intelligent parental character, but also honestly, obviously very clever if she is able to successfully infiltrate. Again, it's there's I have more questions than I have answers, and not in a good way.
Yeah. Because like in the first one, all the hints that were given to her, she is very clever. She's very smart. She's very much a counterbalance to Sebi.
Yeah,
Like she's very capable in a lot of ways that work.
yeah,
And then in this game, she's like we hear hints about that, right? Like from Kidman and whatnot. But then we see something very different. We see like something that's just like so contradictory to that. And I think that there's a couple of different ways that if they really wanted both of those things, there's a couple ways they could do it. One, they could introduce a thing where like not everybody takes to STEM, and so it kind of like divides their brain in some way to where there's like multiple copies of people running around, but they're different aspects of those people,
yeah,
which is an interesting avenue that could allow for a lot of renewed vigor in terms of exploring the mind and trauma and such. And that could open up certain aspects of Moira, the detective, and then Moira, the mother, and so forth and so on. And it could happen with Sebi too, right? Like he could
Yeah.
explore Sebastian the alcoholic, Sebastian the detective, Sebastian this, Sebastian that.
And it becomes a really interesting way to what the game does try to do, but maybe not as effectively, which is confront Sebastian with his own trauma and his own failings and responses.
And you could still have Valentini,
Yes.
but you can have not only different aspects of Valentini who show up and maybe even fight each other in some ways, but they're all interested in capturing different aspects of these people who have been split up, or maybe they're even the cause of that, right? As part of experimentation, they want to see these people as different aspects of who those people are to capture those different deaths and stuff.
Yeah.
There's a lot that you could do with that, right?
Yeah. Well, it goes into the whole element of being able to control people, and if the idea is that they're using STEM to try to build a utopia world that they control, then why wouldn't because Ruvik is obviously exploring how to isolate certain human emotions and responses in the first game.
Yeah.
So then wouldn't that make sense that they want to know how to isolate certain human emotions and responses, because then the people they put inside STEM, they can truly control them. And if
And
they're
they
going to
could do
say,
that.
yeah, they can make a utopia by also saying, we're going to separate out this thing.
And they could do that through the lens of Valentini,
Exactly,
right?
exactly. Or is
So
it something that Valentini figures out he can do because he has enough self-awareness to control STEM a little bit and to manipulate the world? So he's utilizing that
I
component.
just thought of an amazing like phase of a boss fight that could be done with Valentini. Say that his camera is the thing that can partially cause splitting of people
Yeah.
in a fight with him. If he captures Sebastian with the picture, it causes a doppelganger Sebastian to come up that you have to fight.
Oh my gosh, that would be amazing.
And then those are like aspects that he has to confront of himself.
Yes. Yes.
See? Like
Oh. And
we're
it's
just sitting here napkinning this shit.
we just need a
And we're
remake.
making a better game.
We should remake too. Like fuck it.
Todd Howard, hire us.
Please.
Okay.
Please.
To circle back around to Moira. Another thing, when that they could do is, and this one's clunkier.
Mm-hmm.
They change her as far as like what kind of creature she is.
Yeah.
So get rid of Cum Beast.
Yeah.
Um,
Save
she has
Cum Beast for
multiple,
another game.
yeah, she has multiple eyes and stuff in some parts. So make her a spider.
Ooh.
Make her a lady who's also a spider. Granted, the whole Black Widow thing is a little stereotypical, but you could explore like aspects of a spider, like the matronly parts of a spider, right? Because spiders, when they have babies, they carry them in an egg sac,
Yeah.
and they carry those until they're about to hatch,
Yeah.
right?
What's
And then
another?
there's little baby spiders floating around.
What's it? Aren't praying mantises also like they eat the heads off their mates or something like that?
Yes,
I was gonna say, what if they
yes.
went that route instead of going the spider route? We go with a bug that has an elegance to it and is
She could
regarded
be,
as
well, you could have aspects of her that are different bugs.
oh
See, this sort of circles back around to the whole thing of like split off aspects of a character,
yeah
right? So you could do a mantis, you could do a spider, you could do a wasp, you could do like just name your bug,
yeah
like, or name your arachnid. You could do it. Like there's a lot of different things that they could do with that idea.
yeah
And you know what? They wasted it. They
they
wasted the
did.
potential. They wasted Moira. They pissed it all away.
Yeah. And it's really unfortunate because again, objectively, if you're not looking at it as an evil within two, whatever, Cumbeast is not a poorly designed monster. The sound design alone, to me, is a very strong move. That whole guttural, non-vocal sound. I like that. I think that is a good choice. But again, it's like this isn't the wrong game.
Yeah.
This is the wrong game for this. You guys had a good idea. And it's when I kind of want to sit there and be like, come on, is this what we get for not having Shinji Mikami involved? Because, okay, anybody who knows about development on Resident Evil 4, the original one, knows that, like, before they settled on what we know as Resident Evil 4, two whole other games emerged out of that development, one of them being Devil May Cry. So it's something to be said of sometimes you develop something, it's good, but it's not right for the game that you're making. Because he spawned, like, two other games spawned. One of them, another very successful franchise, spawned off of development for Resident Evil 4 because these ideas were working, but they weren't working for this game. And I
Yeah.
think it's an element of just because you made it for it doesn't make it the right thing for it. It's essentially, it's a game that needed to go. Evil Within 2 needed more drafts. And
Yeah.
probably needed fewer people involved in the drafting and editing, period. Like, I think it has the air that even if it wasn't all final decisions, it does have the incongruity that would suggest too many minds involved with power to make decisions. And so the idea is constantly changing. And it hurts because it's how you end up with Moira, which frankly, go marry her to Ethan Winters. She's the white bread wife to go with white bread Ethan Winters. There you go. You know,
Uh,
Mia'd be a better wife to Sebastian, and Mia's also got problems, but at least Mia kind of makes sense as a character. Even if you hate her. You can hate Mia. You kind of want to hate her because it's like, shit, what did this woman do? But at least it's like, well, she's complex. By comparison.
yeah. Which
Honestly,
is a real shame.
yeah, honestly, the more I think about it too, the more it makes sense. Oh my god.
um,
But it's like,
okay.
yeah.
So Moira, sad times. What else about Evil Within 2 is there to discuss?
I mean, I think we really we went for like for like 3 hours talking about
Oh, we're still
this.
going.
We are. I mean, I think that is covering a lot of the big parts. I mean, the main thing is I think the next that we could probably like kind of finish off with this is we don't know if Evil Within 3 is going to happen, especially since Tango Gameworks has shut down. And I've done a little bit of reading, and there seems to be some stuff about Microsoft, which of course they're behind Bethesda, of them making decisions and people not being wholly surprised because I guess they closed down some other studios or something. But whatever. Bottom line is, nobody really knows if we're ever going to see an Evil Within 3. I want to. I still want to, despite my dissatisfaction with the same game, with the second game. Would I love it if somebody went back and said, we're going to remake 2 and actually really fixed all the problems and remade 2 and then did a 3? I would love that even better. But realistically, at best, we'll probably just get 3 one day. Who knows? But what do we want in Evil Within 3? Because I know what some of the things I want in it. Like, hands down, I want the character designs to be better. So bring us back to, if this is taking place after, in chronological order, after Evil Within 1, frankly, Evil Within 2, Sebastian's appearance would make more sense in a third game taking place after Evil Within 2, because at the end of Evil Within 2, he's actually gotten some shit back together in his life. He has his kid back. He is being a father again. So for him to look more put together, like, even if he's dyed his hair, that would make more sense in a third game taking place after, because at the end of the second game, he's basically got the incentive to to take care of himself again, to be less self-destructive. There's a motivation there that could justify, because everybody, like, people can say it in real life. You see it in real life. When somebody starts taking better care of themselves, a lot of times they look better, they look fresher, they look younger because they look healthier.
Yeah.
So that to me works. You could bring that Sebastian in. Now, that being said, I would really love it if they brought Anson Mount back as the voice actor for him. To me, he is Sebastian. I need him as Sebastian. He is good as Sebastian. He was excellent. He was well cast. Brilliant moment. He probably costs a lot more now, given his Star Trek credits. But god damn it, if Bethesda's paying for it, they can afford it.
Yeah.
So, my other thing I want is, frankly, fuck Moira. We don't need more Moira. They closed the Moira plot line in the second game, even if it wasn't well executed. They closed that plot line. We don't even need a whole lot about Lily. You could almost afterthought Lily in a third game, like, okay, she's here, but this game doesn't have to be about her. There is
Yeah.
no practical reason for the third game to be about Lily. I want to know what happened to Joseph. And I think a game that went into, if they included Sebastian, because you almost could justify a third game not having Sebastian in it, except as a tertiary character, to really focus on it being about Joseph. But if it was we're going to have Sebastian now go rescue Joseph, figure out where Joseph is, because now that he knows he's alive, which I think is a very, very justifiable reason to make the game still Sebastian-centric, because it was his partner, and he just found out his partner's not dead.
Yeah.
You could do that. But I would rather it be like the only mentions of Moira and Lily being in so much as how Joseph would have related to them or relates to them, how they are relevant to the history that Joseph and Sebastian have with each other, because Joseph became his partner after Sebastian got married.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's, again, there's not a reason for Moira or Lily to be anything other than just background that is part of Sebastian's existence. But fuck it. Tell me what the fuck happened with Joseph. And it better make goddamn sense.
Yeah. I
what do you want in Evil Within 3?
I want my boy Joseph back.
I want Joseph.
And
hashtag bring back Joseph.
I know they wouldn't do it, but
it's so unfortunate.
What I'm leading to. I know they wouldn't do it, but it would be interesting to see how much of their story they explore, as in like the relation between those two. Because all right, I think that there is a potential for like some gay vibes.
Oh, 100%. You say that with hesitation, dude. You know how much fan fiction there is out there, and I completely agree with it. I completely agree with it. I think Joseph and Sebastian make a great couple.
Yeah, they've got the chemistry and energy there, and I think that it would be cute.
And it also would be a great opportunity, frankly, from a purely just objectively, as characters go, it honestly to me makes total sense. Like Moira, and I think that's some of why Moira bothers me as a character, because Joseph works so well as the second half to Sebastian, and then they wrote in this white bread Moira that just does not compete. Like, how do you like her more than Joseph? It's like they were trying to avoid any tension there, and yet whatever. Okay, yeah, we get it. Internet's obsessed with it, but it works. And also, I'm gonna be blunt here. It would be amazing to see a game bring a queer couple to an action horror based game, bring a queer couple to the center stage.
Yeah. And it's not like it wouldn't be something that wouldn't make sense. They had it like essentially set up from the beginning, but I think that they would be too cowardly to do it. And you know what, Todd Howard? I think this is your chance to prove me wrong.
Prove us wrong.
Make Evil Joseph 3. Joseph and Sebi kiss.
Make Joseph and Seb canon.
Seb
/ Joseph. I'm going to be honest. I wholly support it. I would say that I'm pretty sure most of the fandom supports it. But it works. There is so much chemistry with those two characters on screen. And I know people are going to be like, these are animated characters. There's as much chemistry as I want. You can still write chemistry. Fuck that shit. And frankly, Moira's chemistry is like, it's very one-sided chemistry. Like, and it works. Sebastian still having this deep attachment to Moira kind of makes sense, but he's the one who's traumatized. She's the one who left him. Okay? She's the one who left him, and he's never really gotten himself out of that because whatever. Okay? But also having Sebastian exploring, you know, does he know that he's bi? Or is he sort of discovering that he's bi, you know? And again, it doesn't have to be center stage other than just, come on, you guys! There's potential!
Yeah.
And I love that it's you who suggested it, because I wholly support it. I just, you know.
But besides Moira's chemistry, is basic.
It's so basic. It's basic, and I'm not talking pumpkin spice latte basic because I like a good pumpkin spice latte. It's got spice in the fucking name.
All right.
Mia would have been a better moment right there. Just and not even change anything. Just take out Moira, drop Mia Winters in there, and just say fuck it, go crazy.
And she would be the cum beast.
She would make more sense. Hell, just Mia as she appears in Resident Evil 7, complete with the occasionally going crazy and trying to murder you. Give her the chainsaw. Just literally have fucking Mia change nothing about her. Just drop her in there and it would make more sense.
Fair enough.
It would make more sense. It would be like, okay, you're villainous, but maybe you liked this guy, but you have mixed morals. Because I think that's something the game kind of shies away on, which is shies away from confronting, which is what kind of a person do you have to be that you utterly destroy somebody else emotionally and destroy a commitment to them, a marriage. And I
Yeah.
get it. She's doing it because she's going after a daughter and there's a highly strong maternal instinct, but it's still, to me, it's like that's a rock in a hard place. And the way it's presented, it's like to Moira there was it's presented in a way that Moira, and the way we finally see her, it doesn't seem like she's that broken up about it. I mean, even when she says to bring Sebastian back in, and supposedly she was there. I think there's supposed to be something of like she was there when he came out of STEM, and it's like, okay, but if she's been working from Mobius and is at least aware of what happened with Ruvik and with STEM, then on some level she has to know just how much her husband has suffered. And
Yeah.
yet she just keeps going. And I'm sure people will be like, well, deep cover and this and that. And it's like, okay, but she's not a deep cover agent. She was a detective. She was his partner and his wife. There is a lot that is super fucked up there about it that doesn't get explored. And you know, Sebastian obviously is a person who avoids his own emotions and drinks his emotions. So he's not exploring it. And it's okay. That actually makes sense. Him not dwelling on it makes sense because he doesn't want to, because if on some level he doesn't want to think about the fact that his wife hurt him. That's fine. And that actually makes a great emotional element for a third game of, in the process of going to rescue his partner, him coming to terms with the fact that among the people who lied to him were his wife. And that even though he cared about his wife and she did these things to try to help their daughter, I think it wouldn't hurt for them to have an element of him coming to terms with the fact that his wife didn't necessarily do the right thing by him.
And
You know?
honestly, with her presentation, as far as like the first game, she's a detective as well. She's clever, she's smart. She would talk with him and they would come up with a plan.
Yeah. I mean, they do kind of elaborate in the journals that there's an element of she's just not talking to him. That she
Okay,
never sits him down and talks to him. And I get that there's some level of, okay, we've got another form of trauma that's not going on, but it's the decision for me to leave that I'm like, okay, she did that. Fine. I can almost accept everything. I can pretty much accept everything about how she handled things in the first game. She left him. It's in the second game. It's really the fact that she acts like nothing abnormal happened. And that's really what gets me. It's not
sure.
even his response, because again, his response actually makes more sense. You know, some people cope with trauma by not thinking about it, and if his way
Yeah.
of coping about the fact that Moira let him is to focus more on the fact that she did it to save the daughter, fine. Fine, that is a coping mechanism. It's not necessarily a healthy one, but it's fine. It's the fact that when Moira finally shows up, it's like she doesn't even act like she ever did anything wrong, when you want to sit there and be like, there is such a shit mess going on in your husband right now. He's still like, when he didn't get he is not he was still an alcoholic 3 years after Beacon when Kidman finds him. He has been gaslit into quitting his job by Mobius controlling the people at his own job. So this person who you knew was once this really skilled detective is just fallen apart. His partner, he thinks is dead, is not actually dead. He thinks his child is dead. She's not actually dead. And his wife, knowing his child is still alive, has left him to go join this other, infiltrate this other organization without ever really trying to include him. And that's the
Yeah.
thing that gets me, is that she never tries to include him. And guys, I know we're obsessing, or I'm obsessing at least, over a fictional game. But
That's,
again, it's like when these things, the decisions make sense for the characters, it works. And it doesn't make sense, it bothers me.
yeah.
And it's a very failed, the game, if Evil
Failed
Within,
storytelling.
yeah. And if Evil Within 2 is going to stick with that as it is, fine. But I want them to own that that was the decision they made about Moira and make that something that is addressed. Like, don't just act like it was never there, happy marriage, la la la. Address the fact that Moira fucked her husband over. And make that, and frankly, make that part of Sebastian's growth in the third game. Let's
Yeah.
actually deal with the fact that his wife did him dirty in a really horrific way. I mean, just the
Yeah.
fact, to me, it's kind of horrifying, just the fact that she would have known. Like, frankly, she seems like she's close enough to the whole STEM project that she would have absolutely known what went on in STEM when Ruvik took over. And
Yeah.
just the fact that you want to sit there and be like, you just walked past that. I mean,
It would it would change
your husband could have drunk himself to death on accident.
it would change everything that she would do in the second game if she knows that information.
Yeah. And the thing is, I'm sure if they said, well, yeah, like she would have at least seen something. At the very least, she probably still follows newspapers in Crimson City because they're still in Crimson Cities, or at least at the beginning. So it means if she's still following the news there, she knows at least that there was a slaughter there. And she probably would have seen her husband's name in connection with it. And then him being brought into STEM, you get the impression that she knows that he knows about STEM when she's the one who told Kidman to bring him back in.
Yeah.
And that to me is just a whole level of, it really bothers me if that's where they leave it. And that if they were to, in a third game, basically leave it at that and never touch it again. You
And
know, whereas
she's the one who told Kidman to bring him in.
yeah, she was the one who orchestrated the whole plan and basically had the, if shit goes wrong, get Sebastian. And it's like, okay, it's great you have faith in your husband, but wow, you are not even considering what he's been through that you would do this. You are relying, it's like she never really realized, it's like, and again, it's not that it's unrealistic for the character, it just suggests that there is a very, very dangerous flaw in Moira's mentality that Sebastian never really realizes is there. And that's that she's very focused on whatever she wants, to the extent that she doesn't even think about the impact her decisions have on other people. And so when she says, if this goes wrong, bring in Sebastian, it's basically, she's thinking of Sebastian that she was married to. She's thinking of the husband and detective who was her partner and that, without even considering who they're bringing back in. Kidman gives more thought to the fact that he's traumatized.
Yeah.
You know, but it's very much like, it almost feels like Moira is just acting like she's picking up exactly where she left off, like she never did anything. And I would really love to see a third game openly acknowledge that, especially because in the little bits of Joseph that we get from the first game, we know that Joseph is willing to confront Sebastian. You know, like the fact that he filed an IA report about his drinking. So it's like, to me, there's an element of Joseph is more concerned about Sebastian's well-being and the decisions he makes for himself than Moira ever is. And I
Yeah.
think that's an important thing, that they could use those two characters, even if they didn't ever set them up together, they could explore that of coming to terms with it. Because I think Joseph, if he came out and realized, or if he's at some point known that Moira has become aware of the fact that Moira's involved, obviously because he's still being held by Mobius, which also, Moira, were you going to ever fucking do something about the fact that your husband's partner was basically held hostage by these people? I feel like Joseph would come out of all of that and would have some very strong feelings about Moira as a person.
Yeah.
And I think that would make for a very interesting confrontation now between him and Sebastian.
I think so.
We could write such a good Evil Within game.
We could write Evil Within 3 and do a great job. Hey, Todd Howard, Microsoft. Look, dog. I know that you're over there where you live, wherever that is.
I know cheap apartments.
But
The building I
hey,
live in.
hey, listen. We would do a great job writing Evil Within 3.
We absolutely would.
So
I think we would.
how about it? Sign us up, dog.
Mm-hmm.
Make it happen.
Mm-hmm. And we'll still listen to feedback. Doesn't mean we're going to agree with it, but we will give you a long ass explanation of why it's not a good decision. We will
Yeah.
explain to you why it makes sense and why it doesn't make sense. And if you
Yeah.
tell us, well, this is how much money we have to spend, then we will come up with a fucking solution that works within the budget.
We'll make it work. Don't you worry
Exactly.
about that.
Exactly.
But
This is
yeah,
what we do.
sorry.
I'm gonna okay, because we'll
Oh,
probably
the one other thing that I would want is more characters like Yukiko and Esmeralda.
they were fun and too short lived.
I liked them,
Yeah,
and they were too short lived.
they were. They were.
That's it.
Yeah. Also, don't ever name a character O'Neill again because I'm sorry. The fact that they named that one character was it Liam O'Neill or whatever. My brain
Yeah.
has trouble because I'm a fan of Stargate, and it's just like
And I'm a
I
fan of the turtles.
yeah. So O'Neill is just not a good name choice.
Yeah.
Not a good name choice because I'm sorry, they say O'Neill and he's supposed to be this skeevy whatever, and I'm like Colonel O'Neill. Oh wait, no, you're not Richard Dean Anderson.
And I'm like, where's your banana jumper?
Jumpsuit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm here for a news report.
right, right. Oh my gosh. And also, I think before we close out today, I am gonna like let me take this off so I can show it a little closer, folks. So you can see this is not a cross. I made this necklace for Evil Within, as inspired by it. It's supposed to be like little bloody nail. It's kind of hard to see it. Barbed wire. And then it wasn't going to be
That's very
strong
nice.
enough, so I had to put a backing behind it. And now everybody thinks I'm wearing a cross. And
Praise be to Joseph.
I'm like, it's a nail with barbed wire wrapped around it. The nail wouldn't throw people because I've seen crosses made using nails because obviously nails have their own, whatever. But it's the barbed wire where I'm like, it's barbed wire.
Actually,
I should make it
you could
razor wire.
interpret that as part of the crown of thorns.
Exactly.
There
But
you go.
it's still when people are like, "Oh, that's so pretty," and the ones I can tell that I'm like, "You think I'm wearing a cross? I'm not wearing a
Yep.
cross. I have a cross, but I'm not wearing this. This is not a cross. I'm gonna have to make a new Evil Within necklace that's a little less obviously looking like a cross, so that people can go, "That's interesting," but not, "Oh, that's really pretty," because I feel like
Or
it's too awkward. I don't mind it. It's funny in certain crowds, but some crowds I can't really say anything, and that kind of takes the fun out of it.
Or make one that's cross-like, and you have Joseph on there. You have his glasses and everything.
The glasses, the gloves. Well, I'd considered
Yeah.
at one point doing making a pendant of the Mobius symbol, but again, with my mixed feelings about Mobius, I'm not really like, do I want that? No. It's the unfortunate thing of there's no real other than the symbol that you see throughout the first game that is supposed to basically be kind of derived from the Beacon Mental Hospital silhouette, which works. It's a very layered little bit of visual imagery that I actually like because you don't really understand it. I didn't really realize what it was until maybe the third time I played the game. And then it was like, oh, that's interesting. That's a good way of using it. And it works because, and frankly, from an element of there being patients that were mentally institution patients, it's like some people will perceive more the shape. It's a shape. It's an association with the shape. Side note, the third game with Father Gregory decides to bring in a symbol that seems like a derivation of it, and it just doesn't work because it's like, why is this even here? But that's a whole
Father Gregory is also boring.
Yeah, but that's a whole other thing of, again, why did we put this here? It doesn't make sense. Please make it make sense to me. But yes, I was trying to debate, and there's just not, other than this symbol, there's not a lot of really overt imagery. It's not like how Resident Evil has the umbrella symbol that is very clearly like, this is umbrella,
Yeah.
and it's hard because I like making pendants that go with things that I enjoy, and it's like, oh fuck. Took me a long time to figure out this for this one, so I'd probably redo it a little differently so that maybe it read a little more clearly, but didn't
Yeah.
read as a cross.
Well, you know.
So I'll do it with razor wire.
uh, yeah,
Well,
careful about that one. That one cuts deep.
yeah. Oh, so deep, so deep. Anyways, I think my dog is ready for me to take him out. He's got opinions.
Okay. Well
So,
then where can our Voidwalkers find you?
oh, on all the places that we supply. Oh yeah, you can find me guys on Twitch, Lady Hyacinth 57, Lady Hyacinth 57 on Twitch. Just look for Let's Play Games Good, but don't look that up. That's just what the stream is titled. So you actually find me as Lady Hyacinth, as in the flower. So don't ask, it's a thing. I like Hyacinth. You can find me on there. You can also find me at least until sometime in January, unless whatever appeals, unless China sells TikTok. You can at least find me until January, like mid-January on TikTok as Elkshire, ELKSHIRE on TikTok, and it's mostly just gonna be my streaming videos. But yeah.
Nice.
You can also find me under that same handle on Instagram too. That's not going to really do anything about my Twitch. It's my dog, my artwork, and random shit, whatever. But yeah, so you can find it in a few places. But again, TikTok's only going to be until mid-January unless China sells. So, cause wait a whatever the fuck is going on with our legislation. I'm not even going to go into that. I'm not going to go
There
into
you
the
go.
dumpster fire of politics. It's a dumpster fire. Anyways, Sheriff, where can our lovely viewers slash listeners, Voidwalkers, find you?
Well, just like you hinted at, you can find me on Twitch as Sheriff_Flynn. Right now I've got Blasphemous 2 going on, which I did look, and the creators of that game do not deem it in horror; they deem it in fantasy. Which
Interesting.
the delineations and lines I think is a great idea for a topic that we can just
We
put a
are
little pin in.
pinning that one. We'll come back to it.
Yes,
So,
but yeah, they delineate it as fantasy, but I'm still playing it because it is very fun. I'm at a very frustrating boss that I still have not figured out, which is kind of the way that it goes.
oh.
I also recently played some DBD, which is really nice. I just goofed around as killer. That was very fun.
We need to get on a match together again. It's been a hot minute. I need to update
It has.
DBD. I have not played
Uh,
DBD in probably like a year, and that makes me so sad. But every
you've
time
got a lot of updates to go through with that.
okay, I saw the thing about like the 2 versus whatever, like 8 and
2v8.
2v8. That looks amazing. Okay, that
People
fucking
are
looks
having a
brilliant.
blast.
Okay, that looks absolutely brilliant. I am so bummed that I missed it when it initially happened, and I've just been, yeah.
It's so popular. It's just going to keep coming back. They might even make it permanent. They did a survey.
I think I read something that they said they were exploring how to do it as a permanent.
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. They
So-
did a survey where they were asking if people would be interested in it being permanent, and
I haven't even
very
played it, and I
overwhelmingly
would say
popular.
it. I haven't even played 2v8, and I hands down agree that it needs to be a permanent option.
Yeah.
Like
This version seems way better than the previous iteration, because little things like so in the previous version, I know we're talking at the end credits here, but
whatever.
in the previous, just real quick, in the previous version, like when a killer downed you as a survivor, they could just stomp on you and it sends you into a cage. In this one, they have to pick you up. So them
there's
picking you up gives a chance for flashlight saves.
So there's still, but it also means as a
Flashes where it
survivor,
is.
there's a decision of whether or not to go save the person from one killer or go do something for another killer. So because there's 2 killers, you also have to decide sometimes.
Yeah.
I love
Anyway,
that. Yes.
We'll talk more DBD later.
Yes. Yes.
Probably sooner than some people may think.
It's so coming.
Yeah. So you can find me at twitch.tv/sheriff_Flynn, like Errol Flynn.
Yep. But wait.
And that's about it for now. Way better, yeah.
Yeah.
That's about it for now as far as like my different places where I can be found.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So yeah.
And of course, if you guys like what you saw here, please stay tuned for more. Our next episode will be coming up soon, and we will probably announce our
Yeah.
topic shortly. Just know we are in the horror. If anybody has wondered, we are in the horror genre for the long haul. Maybe not
Yep.
forever, but we are the confabulators. And if we're going to
And if
confabulate, we're going to make sure it's well confabulated.
Yep. And if you don't know what that means, ask the ice cream driver.
Yep. Yeah. Can
Well
be
done.
found on my street on some nights.
Yep. They have
hear 'em.
Great Rocky Road.
Mm-hmm. I personally
Right.
like moose tracks, but you never can find it with them.
Yeah.
Bummer.
All right. All right. I've been Dave,
And I've been Liz.
and we'll see you on the next one.
The Confabulators is hosted by Dave Bockenkamp and Liz Strauss. Editor is E.W. Klein. Theme music, Oh Heavens, is by Cassidy B., composer and artist. Found at cbrva.cardd.co.